Hello, my fellow Westorians. It is Wednesday after the final episode, and our heads are. Well, we've used the term "our heads are spinning" before, but I think they're spinning really fast, like wheels. Yeah, that wheel was not broken in the end, after all. Nope. In fact, it's spinning faster than ever, but it's a different kind of wheel. You know, back in the day, and in the day I mean 2005 in this particular case, I believe it was, George was discussing in an interview the concept of the 5-year gap and how he scrapped it. And he said, if a 12-year-old has to conquer the world, so be it. And, you know, I don't think he's referring to a specific 12-year-old in the story, but given the revelation at the end of this last episode of who is not sitting on the Iron Throne, but wearing the crown, well, maybe that's who he was thinking of at the time. That and many more other revelations and guesses, parallels to the books will be coming in this episode. We'll be discussing primarily the big plot points and how they might or might not go in the books. And it's going to spawn a lot of discussions well after this episode. Along with the head spinning so fast comments that I just made, we just have a lot, to review. We're like I said, a lot of y'all earlier, I said we're going to be doing a reread. We're going to work on that. So there's just so much to reconsider given all these huge plot points we've had dropped on our heads here in the last few weeks. And well, we're here to start that process and see where it leads us later. And with that in mind, well, we have some of our excellent usual folk around to help out with that, to give their excellent thoughts and takes on this amazing amount of new material we have to think about. Starting off with Lady Gwyn. Hey, Lady Gwyn, welcome back. Is your head spinning really fast too?
Yeah, it sure is. I haven't stopped thinking since Sunday, really.
Yeah, right. You've got two beverages. We almost thought you were being like Sean for a minute there, but no, you've got two. They're not in the same cup, are they?
They're not in the same cup, but I do have beer and tea because I just couldn't decide.
Well, I drink coffee and I know things, as my shirt says, and I am drinking coffee, and hopefully I know some things. And welcome back, Sir Buckley, to the show. What about your head? How fast is it spinning?
You can't even see it. It looks like it's still. That's how fast it's spinning.
Well, congrats to you, Sir Joe, on your Castles book. Please tell everyone, give a few takes on your excellent book. It looks really cool. We've only gotten to see the cover and some descriptions so far.
Oh, yeah, thank you for mentioning it. Yeah, last week got to finally tweet it out with the lovely cover, like you say. The Great Castles of Westeros is, as it says on the tin, a little book. Well, I say little, large book about the big castles of all the main regions, so Riverrun, your Storm's End, etc., etc. It's been I keep saying it's 2 years, but it's not. It's actually 3 years I've been writing it. So long time coming. Really nice to share with everyone. You guys obviously big influence with this being the history of Westeros, and that's the kind of thing I look at. And yeah, it's really, really fun to be able to share it with everyone. It's really completely overwhelmed with the reaction. Did not expect it. So thank you for everyone. That was really cool.
This fandom really loves when someone puts effort into something, and you kept everybody in the dark. We didn't know. You just teased that you had some large ASOF project, and
yeah, that was a better title. I preferred that.
It was large was a very meta use there because castles are large. So so it was really cool. Yeah, what a great surprise. So we'll be sharing more info about the book. When does it come out again? I forget.
It'll be soonish, June or July.
Okay, great.
Once the dust is settled.
Right on. Well, you'll hear about it the minute it drops on History of Westeros. We'll be sharing it on social media, and whenever the next episode comes after it comes out, we'll be mentioning it as well.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Yeah, I can't wait to read it myself. I love the castles. Well, let's give a few quick shout outs and a couple announcements and get right to it, because like I said, we got a lot to talk about. Thanks to Jeff Gnarly, History of Westeros' First Sword, and thanks to our Dragon Rider patrons. That includes Telenis the Talon, King of Gagassos, Rider of Telarius, a red dragon with scales, horns, and talons of midnight black. Robert IV of House Ardeacor, Burned King of Blazewater Bay, rider of Atroxus, a black dragon with bioluminescent spots like smoldering embers and a banded blue tail. And introducing Stephanie Snow, Queen of the True North, crowned in Valyrian steel, rider of Commersis, the bear dragon, shining in black with glittering gold horns, eyes, and wings, with talons of icy blue. No art for Commersis just yet, but coming soon. We'll have a hatchling drawing of that. I'm excited for that. Let's see here. Then, along the lines of patron, of course, I've been saying for a while that we're going to change some of our system at the beginning of June. If you join now, you get grandfathered in under the old price schedule. So that's a pretty good deal. If you're thinking of joining, now's the time. We offer things like access to our scripts, shout-outs, early access to episodes, and perhaps most importantly, bonus episodes. And also because of all the great support y'all have been sending during the season, and hopefully we can carry that forward after the season to all the sorts of new material, we added a few new patron levels to keep up with all the space. We added a White Walker level. It's cool to have some sort of evil level in there. And then a Green Seer level. So check that out if you're interested. Also, shout out to our sponsor. Sleep 6 mattresses are so comfortable that had Brienne owned one, Jamie would have never left Winterfell. Did you know that you spend a third of your life in bed? Time you started doing it right. Sleep 6 offers a 100-night risk-free trial, free expedited delivery, a 10-year warranty, and every bed comes with a guarantee that you'll dream of spring. Enter the code GOT and get $200 off any size mattress. That's GOT at sleep6.com. We also want to remind you all about the Game of Thrones storyboards. William Simpson shares the brilliant and painstaking work that is an integral part of assembling each episode of the award-winning series. There are pre-orders available now on Amazon, and it comes out in about less than a week. Like 6 days. It's out on the 28th. The link is on our website, historyofwesteros.com. So check that out. Lots of other links to fandom products and stuff along those lines on our website as well. So regarding my mention of a reread plan, I haven't fully fleshed it out. Patron Jure Roberts and others have asked about how we're going to do it. And let me read this question. How will your content moving forward reflect this? Will you be doing a reread group project thing, videos along the way with update analysis, or just use that knowledge you gained during the reread to enhance upcoming projects? If you guys ever need volunteers for research or anything else, I'm down to help out too. Well, thank you for the offer. Yeah, we definitely, whatever way we do it, we're always going to involve the community in terms of letting people give feedback and taking questions. So I can't answer all these questions yet because we haven't fully decided, but it's basically yes to almost all of that. We're going to do probably not a reread group project thing, but it will be similar to that. It will be scheduled and done in a way that people can read along with us. But it won't necessarily be a group discussion, although we will have live streams where people can comment and add their feedback. We'll definitely have it organized in a way somewhat like we do these show episodes where y'all will have time to send us questions, and then we'll incorporate those questions in the episodes. So the discussions of the chapters will probably be sticking with our live stream format, which, as I said on Monday, we're going to do a Tuesday live stream once a month and a Saturday live stream once a month after the season here. Well, starting, in about 10 days. And right now, patrons are voting on what time the Tuesday stream will be. It looks like it's going to be around 6. That's the vote that's winning. And 6 p.m. Eastern Standard, that is. So stay tuned for more details on how we're going to do the reread, but it's going to certainly be focused on rereading, but we're also going to have it enhance our upcoming content. And some of the content will be focused on the new things we learn. So it's, like I said, kind of all of the above. But like Joe said about his book, we need the dust to settle a little bit before we figure out exactly how to approach all this. Right now, we've just been focused on covering the show, and that alone is just taking up all my time. So the only things we've thought about as far as scheduling are just kind of ideas that popped into my head, but had to focus on what's in front of us first. So with that in mind, let's get right to it. The aftermath is where we start with the episode itself. And, well, it was a walk through ash, I guess you could say. A lot of destruction to see. Joe, what was your first reaction to the episode and your take on this opening scene?
The episode itself is always going to be a big deal. We could always kind of see it coming the end of the week, like we always do anyway. But it was a lot heavier. I actually really struggled with the beginning because I was kind of so a bit too focused on the meta and too focused on the fact it was the last episode. If you've ever looked at my tweets, you'll see I'm on the more positive side of things. But I was actually really struggling to enjoy that first third, because as soon as the twist happened and Daenerys died, I was all in my own head and thinking, oh, that's happened too soon. What's everyone going to think? Is there going to be another twist? Blah, blah, blah. And eventually my wife had to tell me off at an ad break and say, stop thinking and start watching it, because this is the last chance you get to watch it. And once I did that, I could calm down a bit and really, really enjoy it, because, it was a big thing to realize as soon as it started that you're never going to see those opening credits again, and start off that way. So you've got to really enjoy it between.
Yeah, that's for sure. It's the weight. You're right. There's a lot of weight on it all. What about you, Lady Gwyn? What did you think of the opening stuff there and the episode in general?
Well, I felt a similar weight. I was very emotional leading up to it. Tweeted about how much, this has meant to my life and what it's done, what Game of Thrones has brought to me. So, I had a lot of expectations, but really once the episode started, I was able to relax, enjoy it, and start collecting my thoughts. I tried not to overanalyze it in the moment, because I do watch it a couple of times before we get to this point. So just was able to really enjoy it and, take in the twists.
Right on. Now, right away, we're presented with a conundrum that is very much a central theme of Game of Thrones and A Song of Ice and Fire, which is how you treat people, defeated enemies in particular in this case. And it's an interesting conversation because you have surprising characters on different sides of the argument. Lady Gwyn, one of the most famous quotes that referring to this issue is one that you pulled here.
Yeah. See the Lannister soldiers on their knees, and probably a lot of us immediately thought of Tywin saying to Joffrey, when your enemies defy you, you must serve them steel and fire. When they go to their knees, however, you must help them back to their feet. Elsewise, no man will ever bend the knee to you. So wise words from Lord Tywin Lannister there. This is an very interesting comparison.
Yeah, during our Bloodraven series, we did, of course, 3 episodes of Bloodraven. This quote we used because Bloodraven was a hardliner, and of course, it's very interesting to consider that he is mentoring Bran, who is not a hardliner, based on his personality as a young boy. So it's funny to think that Tywin is not willing to go that far, but Bloodraven is agreeing with Joffrey and people like that. So it's an interesting, ethical consideration how you deal with captured enemies, and it's dealt with in the very first chapter of Game of Thrones in a different sense. It's not a captured enemy that they're executing, of course, Garrett, but it is an execution, and Garrett. It's we start off the series with, kind of a conundrum that's not presented as a conundrum, but it's fear and love and mercy all at once. And I want to say I have a lot more to say about that first chapter a little later when we talk about Bran. But suffice it to say, there are some very interesting themes right away in Bran's first chapter that deals with the things we saw in this last episode. And another thing that's we're all looking more for, all of us creators who are on the trail of the things we learned in this last episode and elsewhere in the season, is evidence for what's going on with Daenerys. We all want to see what groundwork is there, what quotes support Daenerys' turn, or argue against it, or argue for the circumstances to be dramatically different, or at least argue for it to be something that doesn't take one episode to happen. As positive as I tend to be about the show, and as I just look for things to talk about based on what the show gives us in terms of the books, it's just, there's no way around the fact that was rushed. So we just have to take it as it is and figure out what we think we can see from the books. But I noticed a couple of things. Obviously, we haven't had time for lots of research, but we do have time for some research. And it's interesting to see that there are a lot of quotes that talk about how bloody it is to take the throne, no matter who you are, no matter how just it is. Even Barristan Selmy said, when Aegon the Dragon stepped ashore in Westeros, the kings of Vale and Rock and Reach did not rush to hand him their crowns. If you mean to sit this iron throne, or his iron throne, you must win it as he did, with steel and dragonfire, and that will mean blood on your hands before the thing is done. Now, Barristan probably didn't mean children, but Barristan himself did nothing when Aerys was king, doing all the things that he did. So, it's not necessarily, Barristan's a good guy, but he's not necessarily on top of this issue himself. So it's really, it's a good example of how gray everything is and how difficult the moral conundrums George puts in front of us are. It's hard to be sure that someone is right or wrong a lot of the times. And even when they are definitely wrong, we don't always know how to react to it. Joe, what do you think about some of this last stuff here, about the issue of mercy and justice and fear?
Yeah, I think I actually put it a bit later on in the doc that Daenerys could have really done with researching Aegon the Conqueror a bit more. She could have done with her copy of Fire and Blood. She had really got the Viserys version, where I'm sure he would have just focused on Field of Fire and burning Harrenhal and stuff. And she probably didn't get as much of what he did to unite people and get them on side and deal with the faith, etc., etc. And that he did use mercy as a tool as well. So maybe if she'd had a bit more of that about her, she would have realized that, just going with the absolute is probably not the best idea now.
Yeah. What did y'all think of Tyrion finding Jaime and Cersei? As in, do we think he'll maybe get to confront it this way in the books? I mean, I think it's pretty likely he'll outlive them. So facing their death one way or another seems fairly likely in the books. Do you guys feel differently? Lady Gwyn, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I think I'm sure it'll be different in the books. Like we said, I think we talked about last week, that he feels so, or maybe it was a couple weeks ago, at any rate, he feels so differently about Cersei that it's hard to imagine it playing out just like this. But I guess there's a possible world where, things evolve and he comes back around to his family. So it was definitely an emotional thing to watch in terms of this episode and these actors and these characters.
Yeah. And Joe, you said that you noticed that there was a bit of not a parallel, but it's emotional resonance to this happening in the basement, because in the books, Tyrion actually spends a lot of time down there.
Yeah, that's right. So he's, that's how he escaped in the first place. He used to go down the Shay on the mosaic part, and he found the dragon skulls down there when he was younger, and now it's where his siblings have ultimately died, and it's where he not sent them to die, but they were down there because of his plan. So it is, it's an important place for Tyrion. It's very emotional to see him finding them, even though he is obviously so far against Cersei in the books, and it'd be quite a journey for him to feel bad for her death.
Yeah,
closer to Jaime, but he might get there.
That's a good point, and it's also interesting to consider that he, some of the fallout from the fallout, pun intended. No, that the logistical fallout, the political fallout, is in the inheritances and a lot of the stuff that just isn't dealt with on the show because they never went there in the first place, so they wouldn't follow up on something they never dealt with in the first place. But Joe, you were wondering, is Tyrion Lord of Casterly Rock now? I suppose he has to be. I'm not sure who else they could be. But I guess they didn't really deal with that like a lot of other things. We didn't even know who some of those people were at the Great Council, did we? Just a bunch of random lords and ladies there, I suppose. Well, I guess it was just lords. Now, among the many things that are coming out as parallels is one that has been somewhat noticed before, but that has really come full circle, and one that is a very good piece of evidence for Daenerys not going for the being so directly headed for the throne, and maybe that she passes on going for the throne in order to go fight the North, or not fight the North, but fight Winter, which would mirror a lot of what happens with Stannis. And that's really interesting because that's exactly what Stannis did, right? He tried to take the Iron Throne, failed, and then went north to fight he did the old, what did he say? He tried to save the realm to win the throne instead of winning the throne to save the realm. And that could be what happens with Daenerys in a sense. I don't know that she'll go for King's Landing and fail and then change, and then go north. I don't think that part necessarily will happen, although I suppose it could. Although it could be, go for King's Landing, accidentally blow it up, and then have to go north. Which would be a lot, that would be a lot more devastating, I suppose. But with that in mind, I started looking for parallels with how people were treating Stannis or how people were thinking about Joffrey's reign. And it's interesting to think that people could look at Joffrey like Daenerys, not because they're actually similar, but because their perception could be similar. If they see Daenerys as this cruel monster who's killed her own brother and done all these, slaughtered all these other people. In other words, the rumors are inaccurate, but they have a grain of truth to them. You could get lines like this, which happens right after the Battle of the Blackwater. Stannis is the true king. A monster sits the Iron Throne, an abomination born of incest. Well, people may not be saying Stannis is the true king if he's dead by then, but he might not be. But a monster sits the Iron Throne, an abomination born of incest, is something that you could see people saying about Daenerys. She is born of incest, and some people might see her as a monster if she accidentally detonates King's Landing or intentionally burns a lot of people to death or a lot of other things she could do that would be taken the wrong way or be taken the right way and reflect badly on her. So I just wanted to raise that issue because we don't really have we don't have a whole lot of research into Daenerys Stannis parallels right now, but it's interesting to consider the other aspect of Stannis, which is that he felt rejected. He felt like, they didn't call for me. He felt like he deserved to be king and didn't understand why the realm would keep, why they would choose Tommen over Joffrey, things like that. And I wonder if we see anything like with Daenerys being rejected by the people that she saves in a similar way. Not that Stannis actually had saved anyone by that point, but you can see the same sort of story beats coming up here and there. Now, so I've been rambling for a minute. Let me let Joe, why don't you weigh in on this, and then Lady Gwyn as well.
I think you hit a nail on the head there. It's a lot about propaganda and narrative. In the show, they would have already been hearing this lie and the other lie from Cersei, obviously, as Daenerys comes nearer, and we'll probably get a version of that in the books as well. The information will come across a lot slower, but there's more room for more to come. We can already see the kind of legends and stories coming from via the boats and stuff from Slaver's Bay.
Yeah,
and there's a lot you can definitely twist against Daenerys. You can say that, didn't she kill her brother? Isn't she a kinslayer? Didn't she crucify all the poor slave masters and all these type of things? Yeah, you can really turn it if you want to. So definitely, if she comes and does some burning of her own, you can quite quickly turn Daenerys into a villain, propaganda-wise. And
you pointed out that Daenerys really could have used some lessons from a maester or reading about Aegon the First, but it's worse than that, isn't it? Because of who she did learn from instead. It's not just that she had no education, it's that she had,
she had Viserys. Yeah. I mean, having Viserys as the filter through which you learn about your history. I mean, even Aegon the First, could have, if she had learned about him, she could have learned that lesson, that Tywin lesson about when your enemies go to your knees. I mean, that was a valuable thing that she could have incorporated into her philosophy. Maybe had she studied those books Jorah gave her as a wedding gift, she might have found a more nuanced point of view. But it's fire and blood and the glory of House Targaryen and the fact that, Viserys was convinced her that the people of Westeros were crying out for their true king. That's just part of her, that sense of destiny that is on her shoulders and has been a part of her since she was just a little girl.
Yeah, well said. Now, circling back to Tyrion here again, he goes straight from seeing his dead siblings to confronting Dany over the destruction of King's Landing. So he's already kind of in a, bad mood, would be putting it mildly. But that didn't help that probably didn't help him compose himself for that confrontation. But it definitely had some callbacks, didn't it, Lady Gwyn?
Yeah, it did. I mean, and this was really the first of many shades of Ned Stark in this episode. I mean,
Yeah.
he was present here. Let's
Yes.
put it that way, in a very big way. But specifically here, you got Tyrion, the Hand, resigning after quarreling with the monarch that they're serving. Ned resigned after quarreling with Robert over the killing of children. Ironically, Dany and her son,
Very
who Robert
specific
had
child.
sent people to assassinate. But here, Tyrion, in a very similar fashion, just kind of throws his, hand to the king pin down or hand to the queen pin away and tries to storm off. It's not, it was very powerful, very similar, and the outcome was ultimately similar, although Ned had a couple more beats in the middle of that. But
yeah.
Yeah.
And Joe, you had some thoughts too with the way Jon had to push his way through the Dothraki. That was interesting, the way that was scene was framed.
Yeah, it reminded me straight away of as Jon's pushing his way through the Dothraki, seeing from behind. It's the same shot of Ned pushing his way through Lannisters in at Castle Darry, right back, and I guess it's episode 2, where he has to go and deal with Robert, and he's really starting to click that Robert's not who he thought he was, and that's obviously what Jon is going through here. Daenerys is not who he thought she was. They've even both scenes have a missing eye turn up, so you really lace it together that way.
That's a great catch, the pushing them. Yes, I was wondering why that. It sort of in the back of my head, I was like, I wonder why they're framing the scene this way, and I never really followed up on it, but you nailed it. That's definitely it. Very good catch. Another topic that's come up that really needs a lot more research. Some people, such as Stephen Atwell and the guys over at Nauticast, have already done some work on this, but there's more work to be done for sure, which is the idea that Tyrion might be the one that pushes for the burning of the city in the books, rather than being the one who wants to try to prevent it ahead of time. And the reason for that is his very dark attitude in A Dance with Dragons and his hatred of the people that rejected him. He thinks of his trial and how the people, he wished he was the monster they believed he was, all that stuff. He doesn't really have this progressive attitude towards commoners that he has in the show. Now, that said, he could develop it. It's definitely something that could happen. But, and it's also maybe fair to say that his attitude his hatred is mostly geared towards the lords and ladies, because it's not like a lot of commoners were even attending his trial, probably. However, there could be collateral damage. Maybe it's tough. It's not entirely clear. We're a lot farther, and well, this is something to think about. What do you think, Joe, about this concept about maybe Tyrion being more of an instigator rather than sort of the good guy in a sense?
There's definitely, George has laid the foundation for that. He's far, far darker still. I think it's almost easy to forget how bad he is still in Dance, because we're so used to show version now. You could definitely see him having that attitude towards, maybe not even, he just wants to get back at commoners, but if he thinks that's the price he has to pay to get at Cersei, he hates us so much at the moment, then you could definitely make a case for him thinking that that's worth it, definitely. Yeah.
Right on. And Lady Gwyn, you noticed something here too. You pulled something from one of the TWOW chapters. Yeah,
in the Mercy chapter, which is it's not Tyrion, but it's the Bloody Hand, the play that's being performed in Bravos, and the character is supposed to represent Tyrion as being played by a dwarf actor. And the quote is, "Let me be the monster and lessen you in fear instead of love." Remembering that off the top of my head, but it's definitely indicative of Tyrion's turn towards the dark and really embracing that kind of ruled by fear, which is what his father always represented. Yeah. And as we pointed out a couple of times, and it's also just very standard, whenever you have a leader who maybe feels that their reign is insecure or wants to remove any doubt as to who's in charge or to remove any other possible claims, well, that's a thing with Jon. Even with Jon's refusal to take the throne, even with his, protestations towards Dany that he'd always be her queen, Arya said to Jon, "You'll always be a threat," didn't she, Lady Gwyn? Yeah, she sure did. I mean, this, Jon pointing out that Jon would always be a threat no matter what, even if he, totally just towed the line with Dany and said, okay, it's fine. I'm going to just back you up no matter what. Think about Maester Aemon going to the wall. Think about Daemon Blackfyre II, who was used by Blackfyre supporters, in the Second Blackfyre Rebellion. It's not something that he necessarily chose for himself. Think about Hagen Blackfyre, who was ultimately murdered because he was a threat. So the theme of Jon being a threat is 100% central to his arc from the moment he was born. It's the entire reason that Ned has hidden his true identity, his whole life. So, Jon has to really face the fact that whether he wants to embrace that and accept that or not, he is a threat to whoever's sitting on that throne.
And that's one thing that distinguishes Ned from Jon, is that Ned himself was never such a threat. But Ned, of course, being the kind of guy he is, wouldn't do that sort of thing to protect himself, but to protect somebody else, to protect his sister's kid, to protect his own family. Sure. But as we see here, Joe, that's not really the way to persuade Jon, is it?
No, not at all. I think if you've met Jon, he's not really concerned about himself so much. But then also on the flip side of that, Jon doesn't realize that because of his lineage and blood, he's more a commodity than a person now. Only similar to when Sansa was in King's Landing and she was, basically the heir to Winterfell. She just became a name, and that's what Jon would be. And Daenerys said before about they would rip him apart that way. And that is absolutely true. But it's not the way to persuade him. It's the playing on him being the shield of men and the honor of it. That's the way to get to Jon.
And it's just like we essentially predicted it would go. And another call back to Ned. The Tyrion-Jon scene was very much the Ned and Varys Black Cell scene in many ways. And even right down to just as Jon's walking away, just as Varys is walking away, he turns around and says, what about your daughter? And it's the same daughter being referred to by Tyrion here, except it's not a daughter, it's his sister, or sisters, I suppose. But Sansa, of course, is the main issue here because Dany doesn't really see Arya as a threat. Maybe she should have, but but she was really more worried about Sansa. I think you should always worry about Arya if you're going to be on the other side of her. But that's another story. Before Jon and Dany have the final moment in the throne room, Dany has some time in there by herself. And Lady Gwyn, that scene of the overwhelming shot of her having wings there, you found a parallel to that in the books, didn't you?
Yeah, Game of Thrones. She's having a dream, and she's dreaming about her ancestors. And I won't read the entire. I'll paraphrase a little bit, but she's going down a hallway, and she sees all past Targaryens, and they're telling her to run. It's interesting because it says her feet melted the stone wherever they touched. I thought that was possible, something that would be looked at a little bit closer. But then it says a great knife of pain ripped down her back, and she felt her skin tear open and smelled the stench of burning blood and saw the shadow of wings. And Daenerys Targaryen flew. And then it goes on to talk about her flying. She's in the dream, she's flying above the Dothraki Sea and heading towards home. It says all that lived and breathed fled in terror from the shadow of her wings. She could smell home. She could see it just beyond that door. Green fields and great stone houses and arms to keep her warm there. So, it's sort of like it encapsulates probably what in the books we'll see is the great sort of dichotomy of Dany, someone that wants this peaceful green fields and warm hearth.
They never really gave that to her show character. They didn't give her this red door, this vision of home. That they kind of took that away from her, which is a lot of that story's internal. So it's it's disappointing they took that away, but you kind of get part of why. Mm-hmm. But still, I wish they did it. But there's more here, isn't there?
Yeah. Well, the more is really.
Oh, looks like she froze there. Oh. So we'll move on and come back to her. You had some thoughts on this too, Joe. It was a little kind of overwhelming, wasn't it? They kind of went a little over the top with some of the imagery here, didn't they?
Oh, the shots are straight out of the Evil Person Handbook. Yeah, you've got the huge straight flag. You've got the rows of still silent soldiers. You've got to walk up a really big staircase if you want to go and talk to her. It looks like straight out of like Star Wars, it's the Empire or the First Order or something like that. which is basically what Daenerys is suggesting, actually, that, you know, they conquer. She's suggesting imperial rule where she knows best for everyone and everyone will listen to her.
Yeah, that's...
And it does serve to remind you how powerful she actually is. It does look like a lot more than half of the Unsullied survived Winterfell, but there seems to be a lot of them. But it does remind you how many there are. It does remind you the Dothraki are still there. And for me, it actually reminded me, especially in her speech when she's saying about them all giving her the Seven Kingdoms, that not so much for the Unsullied, but the Dothraki, she would eventually have to kind of start giving some dodgy kickbacks to keep them happy.
Yeah.
That's the kind of thing she'd have to let slide. That's the price she has to pay to keep, you know, that's the kind of slope she's on now.
Yeah, and it's true, and giving them castles and lands that's not how they do things.
No.
So you don't. Yeah, what they want is blood.
Okay.
They want bad. They want the stuff that you shouldn't want to give them. Okay, Lady Gwyn's connection is back. So go ahead and finish. You should continue with your take, please. It was good stuff.
Yeah. Well, I was talking about how and that was actually a good lead-in. It was a good transition to talk about the Dothraki, because this image of Dany being this terror, you know, kind of in the sky above the world, reminded me of the stallion who mounts the world prophecy, who was supposed to be her son Rhaego. This prophecy that the stallion is the Khal of Khals, who would unite the Dothraki into a single Khalasar and ride to the ends of the earth, and all the people of the world will be his herd, which is very much the language that you're hearing from Dany here. And you get the Dosh Khaleen say, as swift as the wind he rides, behind him his Khalasar covers the earth, men without number, with the rocks shining in their hands like blades of razor grass. Fierce as a storm this prince will be, his enemies will tremble before him, his wives will weep tears of blood and rend their flesh in grief. So the imagery now is very much like what Dany has become. People are trembling before her. They're weeping tears of blood. Women and children are, screaming in grief. And
it's incredible that we looked at that sort of looked at that as a good thing originally, because it was just like, oh, this is just how the prophecy looks. It's actually just, she's going to do these good things, and that's just how it's being written, because this is filtered through the lens of Dothraki values, social value and culture stuff. But it actually, no, it's as bad as it sounds.
It's bad. It was Yokoi who said to me the other night, he said, the stallion that mounts the world is really an aggressor. It's not, we've been kind of looking at it wrong. It's exactly what you just said. We've been looking at it kind of in the
Azor Ahai Uniter. It looked like the Uniter thing, like bringing people together to fight the darkness. That's how we saw it. Yeah,
their version of that, which was, I guess, a valid way to look at it. But
oops,
what is this?
Apparently, maybe not. Like, that's a real hammer to a long-lasting theory there. Like, wow, impressive. Let's talk a little more about the Dothraki as we get into our first set of questions from Mistress Wolf, innkeeper at the Smoking Log in Wintertown. In the books, George R. R. Martin was always keen to show us the clash when two different cultures come together. With Dany bringing the Unsullied and the Dothraki to the Westeros, I never felt D&D made us feel that huge social clash. They were living and fighting together in the North for months. Dany's victory scene finally showed how different the Essosi and Westeros societies really are just by how they perceived the battle outcome. Your thoughts? And please tell me George R. R. Martin isn't just going to put everyone from Essos on a ship and make them magically and conveniently disappear at the end. No, he will definitely not do that. George is all about the logistics, and the setup for the Dothraki is definitely not going to allow what happened on the show to happen. I mean, I pulled a couple of quotes here that are particularly important. Whether or not the general army of the Dothraki will do anything, I don't know, but I suspect they will. But look at this. Every call had his blood riders. At first, Dany had thought of them as a kind of Dothraki Kingsguard, sworn to protect their lord. But it went further than that. Jiki had taught her that a blood rider was more than a guard. They were the Khal's brothers, his shadows, his fiercest friends. Blood of my blood, Drogo called them. And so it was. They shared a single life. The ancient traditions of the Horse Lords demanded that when the Khal died, his blood riders died with him, to ride at his side in the Nightlands. If the Khal died at the hands of some enemy, they lived only long enough to avenge him and then followed him joyfully into the grave. And we saw that play out, right? We saw that play out when Drogo died. And, well, right now, Aego, Rakaro, and Jogo are alive, and they absolutely bowed to her and named them, were named Blood of My Blood after they witnessed first they refused, and then after they witnessed the birth of the dragons, they were like, oh, never mind. We're yours forever. And then this is the end of the quote. Hey, actually, Joe, you want to read the rest of this quote here, right where the cursor is?
Oh, my thing's going slow. Oh, I got a little bit of freezing on my end. You might want to skip over me.
I'll say it then. And after them came her handmaids, and then the others, all the Dothraki, men and women and children. And Dany had only to look at their eyes to know that they were hers now, today and tomorrow and forever. Hers, as they had never been Drogo's. And that's the last chapter of Game of Thrones. And there's just no way that's going to get hand-waved in the books, right? So how that could go, I don't know, but it probably will be bloody. There will be, people want revenge. It just, but the Unsullied, it's a little harder to say. I think the show's portrayal of them might be a little more accurate. They're not leaders, they're not rulers, and they're very orderly and disciplined. And you could maybe see them holding Jon prisoner, which might be how he's saved from the Dothraki. That could maybe work. Joe, I see you have some thoughts on this as well.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, I'm still getting freezing. I think it's just, we've spoke about it before, that the kind of many factions thing, Daenerys is going to be bringing a lot of people, like you said. They're not all just going to be happy to sit on the boat. And the Dothraki are the worst of that. They're too wild a weapon to really wield. They're not going to be controlled as they are in the show. And she will probably regret their use at some point, because she has seen what they are capable of, and we'll probably see it again. And it's not exactly going to be endearing to whoever she's trying to get to love her. And yeah, I just think it's going to be messy. The Dothraki will fight with anyone. They'll fight with people they're supposed to be on the same team as. Daenerys is now going to have to, in theory, mix them all with the Greyjoys and all the sellswords and Unsullied and everyone else. It's not going to be an easy task at all.
True that. Well said. Okay, let's move on to more questions. I hope that gives the Dothraki some justice. They were shamefully unused as characters in the show, but it wasn't exactly unexpected given the conservation of characters and all that. But really, they could have given us one guy. Oh, anyway, I've complained about that enough. All right, let's take questions. The pun award of the week goes to Lady R. Ardross in our Facebook group. Check out our Facebook group if you want some nice long-form discussions, and our Flick group for shorter discussions through a different venue. She says that given Bronn's position on the crown, paying to rebuild brothels instead of master of coin, he should be master of groin. Yes, indeed. Good one. Also, Growl Tiger says, so when the people of Westeros refer to Bran, they may say, how many eyes does Lord Bloodraven have? 1,000 eyes. And 2. Yeah. He's the sequel to Brendan Rivers. From Tommy Pappas. Maybe a better question for Book to Show? Indeed, it was. He posted it then. I don't know why I read that part. Did anyone get Brendan Rivers vibe for Jon's End? Yes, absolutely. It's definitely a lot of Aemon, but also Brendan Rivers. Aemon kind of removed himself from the line of succession by taking the black, and Bloodraven was sent to the wall for murdering a Targaryen or a Blackfire under safe passage. So there's a bit of both in there, because Jon did commit murder / assassination, but there's also the taking himself out of the line of succession by going to the wall. So there's a little of both there. Do y'all have anything to add to that? Was there any more to deal with Brendan Rivers / Aemon? I think we already covered Aemon a bit.
All right. I think you nailed it.
Cool. All right. From Chris Trombley. Thoughts on Jon and Brendan Rivers parallels? Yeah. Killed an unarmed claimant to the throne, sent to the wall by their cousin, and had their own followers at the wall. Wildlings versus Ravensteeth. You know what? I didn't catch the Wildlings and Ravensteeth part. That's really good. And sent to the wall by their cousin, of course. That's a good fit. Yeah, it's a really strong parallel. It goes beyond just the, they're both bastards with Targaryen blood and not Stark blood in Brendan Rivers' case, but blood of the old gods with House Blackwood and Stark in Jon's case. There's definitely a lot of meat on those bones there. But of course, their personalities are very different. Jon's more like Bran in a lot of ways. And, Bran and Brendan Rivers, to me, that's something that there's a lot more conversation to be had because they're obviously much more closely linked but they're farther apart on a lot of attitudes. And so we'll be getting into that. Speaking of, Lord Commander George the Golden asked, did Bran pick himself? Or did he know he would become king but wasn't sure how? Why did so much tragedy have to unfold? I suppose there's no way to know from the show, but the implications are huge. Do either of y'all have a take on this? Just was Bran manipulating his way to the throne, or was it something else? Lady Gwyn, what do you think?
Yeah, I had some notes, and I just found them there because they're way down about this exact thing, though. But in Bloodraven tells him in the cave, the past remains the past. We can learn from it, but we cannot change it. And I would expect kind of a similar conception about visions of the future. You might have a vision of the future, but I would imagine they would have some sort of, I don't know, prohibition against interfering, or I'm not sure, because the coma dreams and green seeing dreams do definitely indicate that he will be able to see the future, or at least a possible future. Yeah. But I think the thing will be that they have to be very careful, because a possible future, it can be changed by very simple actions. So, Bran seems to be more concerned with memory and history, even in the show. So I don't know. On the other hand, Green Seers did apparently take an active role in trying to avert futures in the past. In the World Book, it says they supposedly made the trees come to life to battle the Faceless Men, and they used the hammer of the waters versus the Andals. This is rooted in visions of the future. So, I don't know.
Yeah, it is tricky. I agree. And I really like your point about small things, because that is what Bran did. He did little things to kind of manipulate the situation. He gave the dagger to Arya. He told Sam that now's the time to tell Jon his parentage. And it was very small moves that created big ripples.
Nudge.
Nudge here, nudge there, big effect. Yeah. So I think he did pick himself, to answer the question directly. Yes, but I don't know why so much tragedy had to unfold. I don't know that he could have stopped that. Certainly Daenerys' turn wasn't anything that he had to do with, but he may have seen it coming, and that may have been why he acted the way he did. But maybe it was just more of in order to truly stop the cycle, you need someone like me on the throne. So it could be kind of a version of altruism in a sense. But also want to refer to your comment just now, Lady Gwyn, about how he's more concerned with history and memory, which is true in the show. And I agree with you that it'll be future and past in the books, but to support the idea of the past and how he's such a representation of memory, we have that wonderful scene of him going through the crypts. Well, he really goes through the crypts twice, but the first time with Maester Luwin, when Maester Luwin's like, Bran, tell me about all these Stark kings that you're passing by. And he's just listing them off and what they did and why they were remembered and why they were loved or hated or what have you. And that scene has some different implications now for sure. So I really like that. It's a good detail. Next question is from Lord Francis of House Redcoat. The apparent significance of Jon's parentage in the show largely was that it created a political problem for Dany, creating conflict between Dany and various characters. In light of this outcome in the show, and assuming Jon is resurrected in recognizable form in the books, do you see his parentage as having additional significance in the books, such as prophecy or royal succession? Or do you believe this is a George R. R. Martin twist to demonstrate his parentage had an important but non-obvious impact on the story? Well, I think certainly the dragon riding aspect is going to matter, and that's a magical thing. But beyond that, that's a big one by itself. Beyond that, I'm sure there's probably something, but let me get y'all's thoughts on that. Joe, what do you think about this?
I think we'll see it have a lot more personal effect on Jon. I think it's so laced in, especially in Game of Thrones, just how much personal importance it will be for him discovering he's not actually a bastard, and that he can now learn about who his mother was and his father was. So I just think it will have a lot more significance in his own story and his own arc than just being a problem for Daenerys.
Right on. What do you think, Lady Gwyn?
Well, I have a very lengthy answer to this, but I'll try to
go for it. Yeah,
I'll try to make it as succinct as I can. I think that his parentage in the books is going to be very important. That the prophecy that Rhaegar was dealing with for most of his life is going to turn out to come true in maybe an unexpected way. It's not that Jon is the ultimate heir to the throne, or that he's going to resurrect the Targaryen line. Actually, quite the opposite. I think that it's very possible that Rhaegar saw exactly what Jon's, or his son's, because obviously he never saw Jon, what his son's destiny might be. And that is, if it plays out the way it does in the show, saving the realm from two very big threats, one of which may have been coming from within their own family. And that may have been the tragedy or the melancholy of Rhaegar, because he may have seen that what Jon's destiny was to stop this kind of renaissance of the Dragon Lords, because that's not really a good thing, as we see in this sense. So I think, I have a lot more nuances, and I'm going to stop it there because I could probably go on for the rest of this whole episode. But I suffice it to say, I think it's going to end up being very important, but in a bittersweet way, and not in a way that anyone will ever really know the truth of, other than Jon and a few small people around him. So.
Just as not to make you say more about this when you're just saying you wanted to leave the rest alone, but you and Ashaya did a panel at Ice and FireCon called Good Guy Rhaegar, and you kind of the purpose of which was to consider the possibility that Rhaegar was doing things for good reasons. It's hard to see in some cases how that could have been, but does this? I'm sure this general question is reflected here as well, isn't it? And it impacts what some of the things you might have said in that panel, maybe.
Yes, absolutely. And, we had a listener who was also at the convention who suggested that Rhaegar may have seen some, if you consider that so many of the Targaryens had dragon dreams, and, Maester Aemon talks about that you really have to consider in the background that may have been influencing everyone. So if he was having some sort of dreams about outcomes with his own children, he may have known exactly. Maybe the three heads of the dragon really was more about this kind of a three-way battle between three Targaryens that we'll see in the books. Dany, Fagon, and Jon, kind of fighting it out through Westeros. And, it's just interesting to consider, I always like to kind of tilt your perspective a little bit and look at things sideways. So.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, I really like that. Yeah, and I, just to add to your bit about dreams, I think it was Joe Magician and maybe Crowfoot's daughter came up with the theory that what a lot of the Targaryens were dreaming was of Daenerys' funeral pyre, of Daenerys' pyre that raised the eggs. When they were dreaming of the dragons returning, they weren't. A lot of them saw it as themselves, but it was really her they were dreaming of. In other words, say Aerys dreamed that he would emerge from the ashes as a dragon. Well. Right. His daughter did that. Yeah. So, not she wasn't the dragon, but the dragons were with her. So that's close enough. So, maybe Aerion was dreaming of that when he drank wildfire, and Egg was having the same. So, you could. Yeah. These dreams really have a lot of. Why not apply that thinking to Rhaegar and affecting what he was doing? It makes a lot of sense. Next question from Tiffany Tomchak. What are your thoughts on the members of Bran's small council? Sam as Grand Maester makes some sense if you ignore Gilly and the amount of time it normally takes to forge a Maester's chain, and Brienne will clearly be an awesome Lord/Lady commander of the Kingsguard. However, Bronn is an odd choice for Master of Coin. Did anything really change if we're just putting our friends into these roles regardless of qualifications? His line about brothels makes me wonder if you'll be another Littlefinger. Thanks, you do a great job, and your show means a lot to me. Well, you're welcome, and thank you for saying so. I think that was just the law of conservation of characters playing out there. They didn't want to. Realistically, it wouldn't be Bronn. I really don't think so. I'm not even sure Brienne's going to be Lady Commander of the Kingsguard. That's a nice one, but I have some doubts about that. And Sam as Grand Maester, that seems a bit of a reach too because of the things you said. He's married. He has a kid. Sam is just getting the best of all worlds here. he gets to break all the rules and have all the just do what he wants basically. Do y'all have any thoughts on this?
Even in the show that didn't, the Sam didn't really make that much sense to me because of those things that she mentioned. But as far as Bronn, I had wondered if it was perhaps was remembering that Tyrion had signed this this kind of contract with Brown Ben Plum and the Second Sons, pledging him some huge amount of money. So I wondered if Bronn might be standing in, like you said, conservation of characters, maybe someone like Brown Ben Plum that Tyrion owes a gigantic debt to, that he has to give. Maybe not Highgarden, but some
that makes
gigantic
sense.
holding somewhere. Yeah.
Braun Ben Plum.
Brown. Yeah, Brown Ben Plum. Yeah.
Hey, it works. We solved it right there.
Yeah.
Joe, anything to add?
I think it's like you said, they just needed some quick endings for people. Let's give Davos a happy position. Let's give Sam a happy position. I hadn't even thought about Brienne becoming even Kingsguard, let alone Lady Commander, but I really like it. In my head, I like to think that this is her extending her oath to Catelyn. Obviously, Catelyn didn't know Bran was alive when she charged Brienne, so maybe Brienne's thinking, well, I've protected Sansa, I've protected Arya, I'll have a turn at protecting her last son now as well.
Right on, well said. From my Cowboys family, I know on the show they had Jon off in the north, but is there still a chance of a Jon-Sansa pairing being the end for them, king and queen in the north? Each has a lot of parallels to Aemon/Jaehaerys and Nerys/Alysanne, and I feel like the show isn't going to push the incest all the way to 12 after having Jaime Cersei. Thoughts on any other major characters that might have a slightly different end result than the show? I kind of doubt it. There isn't. I'm not aware of any foreshadowing for it, and big things like that. There's usually a little bit of foreshadowing for it, but maybe I just haven't seen it. But I guess this historical backing as evidence is something for sure. But I feel like Jon removing himself from the succession, rejoining the Watch, something along those lines, like what we given the Aemon/Bloodraven parallels, that seems more likely to me, and that would preclude him marrying Sansa. Do y'all have any different thoughts on that?
Yeah. No, there is a little bit of, there's some hints about Jon and Sansa, but mainly them just thinking of each other. I mean, it's nothing really overt, but in one sense, it wouldn't surprise me. But on the other hand, it would be out of character for Jon, because I don't think he's going to, I don't think he would sort of allow himself to go unpunished, if that, that makes sense. I don't think he's going to just step into a role of something like that.
Yeah, and love hasn't worked out for him in general, really. It's had these really bad endings, like his lovers keep dying, and partly because of him. But still, I'm no psychologist, but he seems like someone that might not get into a relationship for a while, if not ever. From Nancy Groth. Someone asked on the show-only live stream about Bran having had Endgame all along. In the books, will this be Bloodraven's Endgame all along? Will Melisandre be revealed to be the daughter of Bloodraven and Shiera Seastar? Well, Lady Gwyn, I know you guys talked a bit about the last part of that question, the Melisandre Shiera Seastar part, on your Melisandre episode.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that was very early theory of Yoke Boys, and I still think it stands as a fantastic theory. Depends to what extent the showrunners were correct when they revealed Melisandre's age, really.
Yes.
I mean, is she hundreds of years old, or is she 100 plus years old?
Yeah, because if she's 100 plus, it could work. But if she's hundreds, then it can't. Yeah, you're right.
Right. But but she certainly has a lot in common. So even setting that aside, she has many things in common with Bloodraven, the sorcerer, and Shiera Seastar, who was also had these sorceress sort of things related to her. So clearly, George made some comments recently about Melisandre, placing her in the company of people like Gandalf and Albus Dumbledore, and it was clear to me that George considers Melisandre like the great sorceress of the story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah.
To add to that, to answer the part about whether this be Bloodraven's endgame all along, I don't think he's trying to engineer Bran to take the throne, so to speak. I think he is more concerned with defeating the coming darkness. But I do think there is a lot of potential for Bran to have some conflict with his mentor, because, as we said, Bran chooses love. Bran is not a ruthless character. He's a good boy. And Bloodraven is a hardliner, a ruthless guy, and he may have just fed Bran his friend. And that that might not go well. It might be like, what the hell? You made me eat Jojen? Are you kidding me? I don't know that Bran's going to be, how is he going to react? It's hard to say because he's a little boy that's, is crippled. But I don't think he's going to like it. I think he's going to, we're meant to be creeped out by that cave. It's really, really creepy. And that's wrapped up in the whole high cost of magic and all that stuff. But it's also wrapped up in Bran potentially rejecting some of the lessons that Bloodraven's going to teach him, which I think is a lot of potentially interesting stuff there. Related question here from Zombie Jesus. Do you think we'll get more info on magic in general in the books? I was a bit disappointed that we had no cathartic resolutions to how blood sacrifices work, the old gods / werewood network, also White Walkers and House of the Undying magic. Too many rules can make magic stale, but it would be nice if it were grounded in some way to physical reality. Yeah, I kind of agree. I don't think the show, we never really had a lot of hope the show would explain that. We had some that there would be at least an explanation for more about the Night King and his birth and all that, but really they kept that pretty vague. However, apparently the prequel show is going to get into great detail with that. So there is a lot of reason for optimism. And for the books, yeah, there's going to be a lot more, I think. Joe, what do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. There's so much more still to cover, especially if you look more northward. There's all the blood sacrifice still to come. I think we've barely tapped the surface really with Bran. And the show, like you say, just couldn't fit it all in. We even really forgot about warging and everything like that. That's all still to come. Yeah.
Anything to add to that, Lady Gwyn?
Not really.
Yeah. We all kind of just agree. Yes, there would be a lot more magic in the books.
Yes.
They really, it's odd that they tapered it off. They really did make it more about politics. It seems like magic would be a fun thing to do more on screen, but yeah, they just didn't go that route. They really focused on the dragon. Dragons are cool. Prakash asks, my question is, what next? I heard there were possibly as many as 3 spin-offs in the works. It's actually 5, but some of those have been canceled. I guess 3 is what is the current number, I suppose, but more could be added still. The question continues, what 3 spin-offs do you think those would be? And as for the books, will George R. Martin give us an ending similar to what we saw Sunday night, or will we go on a completely different tangent? Valar, reread us. Yeah, well, let's unpack that. A couple different questions there. I don't think, the other spin-offs, well, we have the Long Night prequel, which is the one that's actually begun filming. There's a shot, we tweeted a screenshot of the set, a part of the set earlier today. And there's a lot of optimism there. I'm very optimistic for that. A lot of positive news rumors coming out of that. Nothing too substantial, but it seems pretty cool. About as far as the other 2 spin-offs, I've forgotten what we've taught. That's been brought up in the past. Either y'all remember what the rumors were on that? I know there was maybe a Dance of the Dragons was
quite a lot
possibly
swirling around.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they were kind of mum. There's some details leaked, but nothing too concrete. George even said that there's single lines.
We know it's not Robert's Rebellion or Duncan Egg.
Yeah, Ashaya says we know it's not Robert's Rebellion or Duncan Egg. That's off the table for now. But basically everything else is on the table. A prequel show about Valyria, a prequel show about different houses, anything. There's so many different possibly Blackfire rebellions. There's so many possibilities. But unfortunately, we don't have too many ideas. We do. George, even the way George said it, that there are some single lines in some of the history books that they had a whole show could be written about. And if that's the case, then we really the options are vast. From Valyrian Echoes, morning from down under. Will George R. R. Martin play up Dany as a tragic hero as opposed to an infamous one? A Nissa sacrifice for Jon. Love your work. Thank you for that. And happy to hear from down under. Yeah, I think a tragic hero. Yeah, far more tragic than a villain. Yeah, I think the villain part will be more, in my mind, applied to how people see her within the story. The truth will be a lot more complicated. And on the other hand, if she does have some sort of hereditary madness like her father did, where it slowly happens, well, that's a totally different thing. And that would still be tragic, though. If she was this really good, awesome character that frees slaves and does lots of great things, and then, hereditary issues have her losing her sanity. But if George is making a statement about hereditary monarchy being evil, then having a hereditary disease be in play is kind of an interesting statement on one of the flaws of that system, but I'm not sure if that's what he had in mind. What do you guys think? Tragic hero or becoming infamous? Lady Gwyn, you first this time.
Dany?
Yeah.
Dany, I think is going to be an infamous, but it's going to be tragic. It's kind of both.
Yeah.
It's interesting because George's, not a blog post was yes and no, yes and no, yes and no. So that's kind of my answer to this. Yes, and no.
Yeah.
We're both. She's tragic infamy.
Tragic infamy. Right on, Joe. What do you think? Yeah, I've written quite a bit about Daenerys and this. Just kind of, we said about her narrative. It's just depends which way you want to look at it, really. George is obviously going to give us a lot more of a window via her POV, so it probably will come off as a lot more tragic to us as readers. It already does to me as a viewer anyway, but in world, like you say, the majority, I think, will probably remember her as not good, especially in Westeros. In Essos, her legend will grow. She'll be the great liberator. She'll stay the mother of dragons, but I'm sure they'll think up some cruel nickname for her in Westeros for what she did to King's Landing, and that'll probably be the same thing that happens in the books, I would guess.
Right on. Okay. From Radiance Bucknor, very good name there. The books say dragons may be even smarter than humans. Why the surprise the Drogon understood that the throne killed Dany? Well, Lady Gwyn, you had a very good theory on this. We talked about this a bit on Monday. I don't need to give a different answer, but I like your thoughts here.
Yeah, this is my perspective. That you saw that scene before when Jon, right before he walked in, and Drogon was hidden under the snow, and just looked at Jon and went back to sleep. I think he didn't see Jon as a threat, and it wasn't because he was Targaryen, because I would remind you about Rhaenyra.
Yep.
Dragons definitely will kill Targaryens, but I think it's because of his bond with Dany. Think more like, would Silverwing have roasted Daenerys for something?
Good point.
Probably not. It's because the writers are bonded together, so that creates this sort of thing. Remember that scene when the two dragons were watching Jon and Dany? When they were out on their little romantic picnic.
And in the Dance of the Dragons, we have examples of opposing factions, their dragons snapping at each other. And when in the past, when they weren't on opposing factions, the dragons didn't care about it.
Yeah, they'd be sort of, So I think that's why. So I think when Drogon came in, obviously he senses Dany's death. He comes in, and what's she got sticking out of her chest? This bit of iron, which is the same stuff that's in the Iron Throne. So I think that symbolically symbolized to him the thing that killed her was literally that thing sitting right next to her.
It had the same smell, right?
Smelled, this evil. You get an interesting perspective of that from Warging, which there's something that's kind of missing from the show is smell. You get the wolves, the way they interpret things like swords and armor and stuff like that, with lots of senses other than vision. And I think that symbolically Drogon did perceive that the object that had killed her was the throne, and that it was more metaphorical that it was the throne that drove her to her destruction. I mean, that was more for our perception. So
right on.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's take a quick mid-roll break and come back with more questions. Y'all have given us a lot of good questions, many of which cover topics we already had listed. So it's kind of killing two birds with one stone. I want to give a shout out to our Blood Rider patrons. Speaking of Blood Riders earlier, if Ashaya and I were killed, I imagine these folk would not just hand wave it. They'd come and get revenge for us. Our Blood Riders are better than Dany's. Her show ones, anyway. The book ones, we'll see. Vorsaki, wielder of a Valyrian steel arak with the dragonbone hilt. Kookoi, called Sunpiercer, wielder of a dragonbone bow. And Kokavo the Tamer, wielder of the wildfire whip Gehenna. And a shout out to our Ironborn captains, who are an excellent group of folks as well. Black Matto Stormrider, captain of the Rusted Hinge. Sir Selvus Redblade of White Harbor, captain of the Trident of the North. Lord Chucklaws, captain of the Dromund Nightblood, destroyer of evil. John Gregor is captain of the Fist of the Drowned God. Sir Kieran of Lonely Light is Scourge of the Sunset Sea, captain of Naga's Breath, a Dromund armed with siphons of wildfire. Aileen is Archer Queen, captain of the Border Collie. Crimson Cade is captain of the Drowned Queen's Vengeance. Jasana the Just is collector of tolls, captain of the Golden Gift. Lord Mitch of House Bailey is captain of Widow's Blood. His heir is Lordling Mason of House Bailey. And Beneath the Gold is a podcast focusing on lesser-known A Song of Ice and Fire characters. Check them out. All right, that's all we have for the mid-roll. We can get right back to it. Just had to take care of those excellent shout-outs. Back to the questions. Where were we? Let's see here. Romina Akemi asks, Daenerys' decision to burn the Tarleys appears as a turning point away from mercy and toward fear. However, I found her decision to execute Massador, a former slave, deeply disturbing. Thoughts? Yeah, I do think that was a turning point, and the way you framed it is excellent, because that is a huge dichotomy that I want to get into in general, and especially with Bran, and just the way we began this episode, we talked about that dichotomy. And yes, Massador, that's we maybe should have made more of that scene at the time. We all thought, wow, she made this mistake. It seemed kind of clear at the time that it was a mistake, but she wanted to, be consistent with her sense of justice. So I don't know. Yeah, that was a tough one. Joe, what did you think about Massador versus the Tarleys here and Dany's turning point?
Yeah, I think the show almost kind of forgot about Massador. It didn't really, apart from obviously the Sons of the Harpy getting angrier, they didn't really focus on it. The Tarleys, which already seems like so long ago, you'd have to remember that's kind of like her first impression on Westeros, really. And she already burnt the baggage train, but people in Westeros they're used to stuff like that happening in the name of war. But after the battle of people surrendering, a long old family, that was definitely a bad first impression, and it's come full circle to haunt her now, because we've seen the stuff with Sam already this season, and just that plus you're burning innocence, it all adds up, and not again, it goes back to those Aegon the Conqueror lessons that Daenerys hasn't learned.
Yeah, and I think just to add to that too, there's even more fear with being burned to death than the standard just have your head cut off or go to the block. Even though we know that Dragonfire is so hot that it might be just as unpainful, but it's the whole perception versus reality thing that we're really seeing how that could happen in the books. There's so many examples of what Daenerys' intent could be versus how it could be seen, and the rumor mill going to town with all that. So yeah, really very good question there. From Lil Angry Irishman, Quaith's prophecy referring to the Starks. Much love. All right, much love back to you, Lil Angry Irishman. Well, probably not, but maybe it's interesting. Quaith's prophecies are one of those things that we'll have to just take another look at and reconsider everything we've just learned and see if anything is different. Honestly, haven't had time to do that yet. Any thoughts on Quaith? I think it's still Daenerys oriented, talking about what's coming to her and all that. But again, like I said, I'll have to maybe reconsider. Lady Gwyn, any thoughts?
No, I mean, I hadn't really thought about it. I mean, I think Quaith's prophecy is pretty much nailed on, except for one or two things. I mean, it seems obvious in light of what we know is coming to her, but there's always red herrings. So,
and there's other parts of the theory, or the parts of the prophecy that maybe we're not focused. We're talking about people coming to her, but that's not the only thing Quaith talks about. Right. So, it's worth another look for sure. Joe, did you have any thoughts on that, or are you kind of in the same light, like we need to look again?
Yeah, I would definitely need to look again. Yeah,
you don't have Quaith's prophecies memorized? Come on, man.
On the wall.
From Chris Trombley, do you think Dark Sister will be given to Arya by Bran in the books instead of the dagger? Yeah, maybe not by Bran, but probably. But I don't think it will be to kill Night King, because we don't think there's a Night King in the books. But I do think Arya ends up with Dark Sister. It's a good. Just the name of the blade really fits her, doesn't it? What do you think, Lady Gwyn?
Yes, I was very excited about this, as you know. Right after episode 3, she's the Dark Sister. So,
Would you agree, Definitely. Joe?
Yeah, I think if I'm right, even the description of the blade itself would be something Aya could end up using. So I think it's very telegraphed here.
Right on. I believe Ashaya tends to agree as well, if not fully agrees. So 4 out of 4 are a big yes on that. Thumbs up on Arya getting Dark Sister. Tracy McMillan, we'll catch this tomorrow. It's late north of the wall. Just want to say thanks for all the show coverage over the years. Much love. Well, thank you very much, Lady Ardros, who is from Scotland. So, yes, she is indeed from the land of north of the wall. Excellent. Thank you very much, Tracy. From Vince Fergali. Hey, A&A, just want to thank you for the knowledge you and your colleagues have shared over the years. Can't wait to see where you go from here. We can't either, because we're so excited to reprocess the entire series given what we've just learned. So, I feel for people who hated the ending. I really do, but there's so much for us to think about now, and that is awesome. That's really fun, the fact that we have so many new book considerations to have. So I choose to stay positive. And thank you, Vince, for also staying positive. Alec DEK, I really appreciate y'all's positivity. right on time. It is great to have such prominent members of the community contribute to such excellent analyses to the future. Well, thank you, Alec. And I also want to say, all this praise, some of this praise needs to go to y'all as well. Joe and Lady Gwyn, especially Lady Gwyn, because you've been around with us for years covering the show. So you deserve just as much thanks. Thank you. All right. From Ben Barkley, from my favorite The Song of Ice and Fire channel. Thanks. Well, thank you, Ben. And from Tina Carney, no question. Thank you, Tina. From Paul Atreides, great stream, guys. Happy Wednesday from Tallahassee. Yeah, another Tallahassee shout out. Always love those. My hometown. Fred Targaryen's Uncle Daddy with his usual random denomination number, super chat. Thank you very much for that, Fred. How about a moment of silence for the great Khaleesi, the bomb-diggiest character in the series? We could do that. Let's have a quick moment for Dany. The bomb-diggiest character in the series. Well, she certainly wields the bombs. If dragons are a parallel for nuclear arsenal, she is the bomber of the series, the one who drives the big B-57. Although I guess she'll have some, not co-pilots, but there'll be some other people flying the bombers as well in the books, I'm sure. Katie O'Brien says, never been able to watch live before, but I'm homesick from work today. Thanks for the much-needed therapy sessions all season. Love from Australia. Oh, another one from Down Under. Well, thank you very much, Katie. Sorry you're sick, but hey, silver lining is this, right? From Scott Wortman, Bloody Ben Blackwood. Great coverage this season. Excited for new book material. Shout out to Yoke Boy since you can't be there. And of course, Ashaya is the best. From the History of Westeros Mods. Again, yes, shout out to the History of Westeros Mods. That's Jennifer, Scott, Rebea, Tommy, Ari, and Laura. Thanks to all y'all, and we really appreciate all the work you do at our Facebook group. And indeed, Ashaya is the best. Randolph Sparks, what do you make of George R. Martin's recent blog posts? Of course, we got this question. Yes, I'm glad someone asked. Well, I have very long held the attitude of I don't care what he says. I'm not raising any expectations until it's done. And I got to admit, this one moved me a little bit because he's just so adamant about getting done before next Worldcon. But still, I'm just going to keep on paddling. And when it comes, it comes. What about you guys? Are you getting excited, or are you trying to just keep level? Lady Gwyn, you first.
I did cheer. I mean, I cheered at the dinner table, and somebody might have rolled their eyes at me.
A young boy, I suppose.
Well over a year away, so but no, I mean, I guess it's just nice to see, because for all these very many years we haven't seen any sort of this much positivity or concreteness, right? So
yeah,
it just I don't care if it comes out in 2 months or in a year and 2 months. I just I'm excited that he's feeling positive about it. That's really
okay. Yeah, I'm with that. What about you, Joe?
Yeah, I'm much the same. Just glad to see him excited, and also he explained how big of a thing the show was for him, and that's obviously true. It's really good for him to be able to say that, and I think it just motivates him, things. It just gets him going. Whenever it might come, I'm definitely not raising expectations, but just him being invested in it again is all I'm really asking for.
Right on. Okay. All right. Let's move on to Tyrion and Jon having their discussion that leads to the big stabbing. you'd say, Lady Gwyn, that Tyrion really goes through all the issues with Daenerys and tries to sell him on that. But at first, Jon is kind of a stonewall, like he was with Dany on the issue of Sansa and the secret spilling. It's kind of the same sort of stubborn naivete, isn't it?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, it really is. I mean, Tyrion's really just basically he's got a long laundry list of and it's escalating, right? All the things that she's done, it's escalating, and maybe they see getting a little bit more gray every time. But you know, it may be less easy to justify, but Jon just is right on board. It was interesting because a lot of what Tyrion was saying it was echoing things that we talked about last week, you know, or either on the review, but just even as fans talking about Dany over the course of the week in between the two episodes, especially like Tyrion's commentary on the comparisons to Tywin and Cersei, because we did talk about that last week. And he said, yeah, they did bad things, but none of them even kind of hold a candle to this. So it's pretty bad. He had this certainty in spite of it all. Tyrion talked about his certainty that Dany was good and right, which gave me this very strong Stannis feeling, something we talked about earlier. You know, there's something that is going to take a little more analysis to get the comparison correct. But, you know, there's this constant characterization of Stannis as a righteous man, and he has a righteous cause. If you look for the word righteous in A Search of Ice and Fire, it's always about Stannis. So I found that quite interesting. Then moved on to the Maester Aemon thing, which we've talked quite a bit about Maester Aemon comparisons already, right? But Jon invokes that love is the death of duty. Tyrion turned it right back around on him. Duty is the death of love, both of which were true in this case. I found this was interesting because if we're talking about love, I was reminded about Lyanna saying love is sweet, but it cannot change a man's or woman's nature. So, then we're moving into the shields that guard the realm's men and the sisters part, which we've talked about that. You know, this is really what seals it for Jon, right? Is that parallel with Ned. Remember, he's already got this kind of in his head because Arya had mentioned it as well. So now you have that that parallel to Ned sacrificing his honor to save Sansa. And I have this quote from Maester Aemon in Game of Thrones asking Jon, tell me, Jon, if the day should ever come when your Lord Father must needs choose between honor on the one hand and those he loves on the other, what would he do? And Jon's answer at the time was do whatever was right, no matter what. And in the end, the dilemma for Ned came down to what was right. You had to choose what was the right thing. And that's exactly what it comes down to for Jon. That's what the language of this scene with Tyrion is all about. You have to make that choice, which is the right path to take. And so you see that, you know, fear versus love coming, really drilling down on Jon and Dany finally.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And Joe, you had a couple of good thoughts here written down as well.
Yeah, I think you can quite plainly see that Jon he does know exactly what Tyrion is saying. He knows what Daenerys is up to, but he's in denial or bargaining stage. It's very similar to Varys to Tyrion in episode 4, where he gives reasons, all of which are true, and Jon keeps kind of coming up with the same answers, but they're getting a little bit weaker each time. He can't really deny it any longer. And I think you can just see that as this discussion goes on and it turns to, Tyrion's quite obvious suggestion that they're really discussing taking the brunt for everyone and doing this horrible thing, adding this weight that's never ever going to be lifted from them, which is kind of Jon's whole arc about, having to do the heavy lifting and having that duty on. It's there for Tyrion as well, but it's a little bit thinner. And it really just kind of takes you back to Jaime and what he did for the greater good and what he had to put up with afterwards.
Yeah, True that. Okay, so then we move on to the actual confrontation between Jon and Dany. At first, you can kind of see Jon's kind of trying to work himself up to do this awful thing, or to make sure that it's justified. So the first thing he does is he brings up the slaughtered soldiers who had surrendered, and then he brings up children. And Joe, you had some thoughts on this.
Yeah, a bit earlier in the episode when he goes past Grey Worm, he's become an executioner now more than a soldier, and it took me back to the old Ned lesson of he who passes the sentence should swing the sword. I don't know if Jon would specifically apply this to a woman, but he's definitely not keen on what's going on here of this just outright one rule fits all type thing.
Yeah,
if you're on that side, you're dead.
Yeah, he hates that, and he's also mad that Dany doesn't even know it's happening. She doesn't even, it's not just that she's not doing it herself. It's that he says, have you even been down there? There's kids dead. He doesn't even know this is happening. And that makes him just as mad as anything else. So Lady Gwyn, you caught you have a nice reference here as well.
Yeah, it's interesting because this is in the very first chapter of Game of Thrones, which of course is Bran. So we've got this theme coming up in Bran's very first chapter where Bran, they're seeing this deserter executed by Ned, and Bran is a little confused, and he says to his father, King Robert has a headsman, and Ned says he does, as did the Targaryen kings before him, yet our way is the older way. The blood of the first men still flows in the veins of the Starks, and we hold to the belief that the man who passes the sentence should swing the sword. And, it's not necessarily, like Joe said, that maybe we're going to expect Dany to swing the sword, although why not? But at least own it, at least be aware, pass the sentence, right?
Yeah.
And she wasn't really doing either of those things. But then, so this is bothering Jon. It's bound to bother him. But then it very quickly becomes about the children, doesn't it? And that is such a huge part of Ned's arc. Everything is about saving and protecting children, even his kind of final conflict. So, you had this great quote.
This quote just hit me, knocked me to my knees when I found it. It was like, man, this is really exactly what Jon, we talk about these parallels between Jon and Ned, and this is just, I guess it's foreshadowing. I don't know what you want to call it, but it's powerful. Here it is. Yet last night he had dreamt of Rhaegar's children. Lord Tywin had laid the bodies beneath the Iron Throne, wrapped in the crimson cloaks of his house guard. That was clever of him. The blood did not show so badly against the red cloth. The little princess had been barefoot, still dressed in her bedgown. And the boy. Ned could not let that happen again. The realm could not withstand a second Mad King, another dance of blood and vengeance. He must find some way to save the children. Ooh, yeah. And that's really early in a Game of Thrones. And think of the way he says it, another dance of blood and vengeance. And when Daenerys is asked by not Pyat Pri, but Zaro Zoan Daxus, who says, don't go to Westeros, let's go sail around the Jade Sea and listen to poets and do all this fun stuff and sail in pleasure barges and drink from the cup of blankety blank. And Dany says, I want to drink from the skull of the usurper to toast to vengeance. It's like, oh, right. Okay. And so that reminds me here. That's this whole thing. That's the part of Daenerys's quest that is the toxic part. The vengeance part of it is not good.
The interesting thing about this quote is that he must find some way to save the children, and he's thinking about very much what's on his mind is Robert's wish to have Dany assassinated. So Ned is going to give up his life, his position to save Dany and her son, her unborn child.
He passes the buck to Jon.
There's this huge irony, but at the same time, he's got very much in his mind Jon and how he's sacrificed so much to protect Jon from Robert's rage. From this sort of being in that same position. He was one of Rhaegar's children after all. So there's this whole circular, just amazing when you start really trying to pick that passage apart.
Yeah.
So that's great.
This is one of the ones that sent the wheels spinning even faster. And Joe, you had some great thoughts here that relate to this scene to just before Jon comes back in and her visions and stuff.
Yeah, so we've seen Daenerys in the throne room once before, back in her vision all the way back in season 2. I'm sure most people remember that she goes to touch the throne but doesn't, and then goes off to see Drogon. But the point is, she goes on living. And I think the point is that this time she does touch it, as in she is throwing herself fully into, that's what she's after. She's after power now, because there isn't much left for her, and that leads to her immediate downfall. I know, because I don't think we actually even get that vision in the book, so that's quite different. But perhaps those visions that she did see in the House of Undying are just things that need to pass for her survival, maybe.
Right on. Okay, let's talk about the actual moment of death here and the Azor Ahai prophecy. Certainly a lot of people want us to talk about that. Well, Lady Gwyn, you want to start?
Well, we start with this quote from, the prophecy from the Davos chapter, where we get the actual story. Azor Ahai thrust the smoking sword through her living heart. It wasn't exactly a sword in the show, but he certainly thrust it dagger through her heart.
Yeah.
And the imagery is there, of course.
Yeah, it is, but there's some problems, aren't there? I mean, for example, Daenerys is the one who checks off the boxes of Azor Ahai better than anybody, better than Jon. She's the one who woke dragons from stone, after all. So how is she Nissa? That's a little confusing, isn't it? I'm not exactly sure what to make of that. And what's funny is as a small aside here, Game of Thrones season is super fun for us. It gives us a lot to think about. It keeps me up late at night, early in the morning, a lot of times thinking and getting ready for this. And sometimes I write very silly notes. And here's an example, because I'm looking at what I wrote here. And I wrote, no one ever told us Nissa was a Nazi. It does have SS in there twice. What am I talking about? Then I wrote, they may have gotten things crossed up with Indiana Jones here, because the Iron Throne belongs in a museum. I really don't know what I was writing there. Then it says Nissa backwards is Asin, and Jon is an Asin. What? Yeah, I wrote that, so I don't know. Yeah, anyway. Sorry for the distraction, but that was just, I don't know what the hell I was doing.
I was wondering who wrote that, Aziz.
Yeah, I wrote that at probably 6 a.m. or something. I was probably up all night. I get pretty silly when I'm tired. So
that's the consequence of the brain just spinning until it's smoking.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's talk about a smoking sword.
Emphasis on the smoking, I think.
Yeah.
And so you brought up another point here, though, Lady Gwyn. This isn't. There's a taboo that kind of snuck past us here. I didn't even think of this, and it's a huge deal.
Yeah, there's Jon now is a kinslayer, and I was when we get nearer to the end, there's a big parallel between Jon and a story from someone north of the Wall, and the end of the story says the gods hate kinslayers. And I thought, Jesus, Jon's a kinslayer, and that is not going to escape him, because it's a huge taboo in the North. It's a great big part of their culture. So, this is why he's not going to ever choose any sort of power. If it plays out that he is the one that has to do this, it is going to be the ultimate tragedy, because he's going to have to walk away from everything because of, this sort of who he is.
Because he killed one little lady.
They say that he kills one little lady. Just one little lady.
I mean, think of a tailspin that Robb Stark went into when he killed Rickard Karstark, because the Karstarks haven't been related to the Starks for like centuries and centuries.
Yeah,
they diverged so far ago that they're just like the only tangentially are they related. So imagine if Jon has to kill his own aunt. What that will do to his psyche, and it just
it's that Robb example is fantastic, because if you remember what Karstark says, he says, "Kill me then and be cursed."
Right.
And it's like, yeah, it's kind of what happened. He kind of was cursed.
Well, he was. And so, I mean, this is it. That just shows how huge that is in their culture. The North is, they have things like kinslaying and guest right loom much larger in First Men Northern culture than they do kind of in the South. So, it's just something to think about and keep an eye on how that's going to play out for him.
Speaking of smoking, shout out to Weed Detective on Twitter, who points out that Ned refuses to assassinate Dany, but Jon has to, which we mentioned. But what we didn't mention is that Jon gave someone else a for the watch moment. After having it done to himself, he did it to somebody else. Ooh, yeah. Those are some feels. Joe, you have some thoughts here.
Yeah, similar to on those lines. It really struck me that Jon finally kind of went underhanded to do the deed. He lies to her, tricks her. I don't think, he gave her as many opportunities as he could. He really tried to bargain. It was kind of tragic seeing him beg her not to go down the route that she was, but it was a no-go. So he gave up his honor for the realm by, tricking, kissing her, and then kind of underhandedly killing her. And then even after that, when she goes down, I got very emotional because we didn't even get to hear any final words. She just kind of looks and almost says something, and then that's it. And it really, really hit me like a brick.
Yeah. And then, of course, the Drogon's reaction is just tear-jerky, isn't it?
Yeah, nudging her. That really got me as well.
That's reminiscent of Silverwing nudging Vermithor's wings after the dance of the after the second battle of Tumbleton and the Dance of the Dragons. It just took me right back to there. It's like, damn it, how do you make dragons be so sad? How does he do that? How do they do that? Yeah, and it's so there's a bit of irony with the throne itself being unmade, isn't there, Lady Gwyn?
Yeah, I forged by Balerion. Unmade by Drogon. Two, black dragons.
People say Drogon is Balerion come again. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah.
There you go. All right, let's move on here. I've got the next section is called Hour of the Worm, which is funny because we got a super chat from B-Word who says, I'd love to hear your thoughts on the Hour of the Wolf equals the Hour of the Worm. Yep, well, of course I caught that pun. Thank you for your dedication. We're very lucky fandom to have all of you. Well, thank you for being a part of it. We really appreciate the support and the great questions. Let's see here. Yeah, so it was kind of like we kind of guessed at how this might play out. Hour of the Wolf, Hour of the Lion. I thought maybe it would be, and it kind of was sort of Hour of the Lion. Tyrion sort of took charge, even though he was in chains. But Grey Worm had the energy of position there. He had the the spears at Jon's throat, which gave him a lot of leverage for negotiating. And well, that was pretty significant, wasn't it? There's this great council that we came around. Well, got a couple of quotes here that take us to the idea of this great council happening. It's mentioned in the books, and it gives us a few ideas as to how this could work out. Here, I'm going to read the first one, and then we'll have Lady Gwyn read the second one.
Okay.
Jon was not entirely innocent of the history of the realm. His own maester had seen to that. That was the year of the Great Council, he said. The lords passed over Prince Aeryn's infant son and Prince Daeron's daughter and gave the crown to Aegon. So the quote continues. Go ahead, Lady Gwyn.
Yes and no. First they offered it quietly to Aemon, and quietly he refused. The gods meant for him to serve, not to rule, he told them. He had sworn a vow and would not break it, though the High Septon himself offered to absolve him. Well, no sane man wanted any blood of Aeryn's on the throne, and Daeron's girl was a lackwit, besides being female, so they had no choice but to turn to Aemon's younger brother, Aegon the fifth of his name. Aegon the Unlikely, they called him, born the fourth son of a fourth son. Aemon knew, and rightly, that if he remained at court, those who disliked his brother's rule would seek to use him. So he came to the wall, and here he has remained, while his brother and his brother's son and his son each reigned and died in turn until Jaime Lannister put an end to the line of the Dragon Kings.
Oh, yeah. And then we get a quote from Catelyn that's even more important, I think. Joe, do you want to read this one?
Sure, yeah. Robb will set aside his crown if you and your brother do the same, she said, hoping it was true. She would make it true if she must. Robb would listen to her, even if his lords would not. Let the three of you call for a great council, such as the realm has not seen for 100 years. We will send to Winterfell, so Bran may tell his tale, and all men may know the Lannisters for the true usurpers. Let the assembled lords of the Seven Kingdoms choose who shall rule them. Renly laughed. Tell me, my lady, do direwolves vote on who should lead the pack?
So that laughter about Renly there, that's those lords laughing during the Great Council at the idea of democracy. which I thought was a pretty nice touch because it would not be reasonable for these lords to accept democracy. As much as that would have been a cool feel-good ending, it would not have been exactly realistic. So some sort of moving towards that. If you could call elective monarchy a move towards democracy, then, well, that's at least something. But you can see this is pretty cool. There is another quote about the Great Council, but it's really long. But it relates to Aemon talking about killing the boy. He says, I'll just read part of it here. He was only 33 when the Great Council chose him to mount the Iron Throne, a man grown with sons of his own, yet in some ways still a boy. Egg had an innocence to him, a sweetness we all loved. Kill the boy within you. So I think that's interesting that we have all these mentions of the Great Council around some of these same characters we have parallels to elsewhere. Aemon, Egg, and of course these other characters like Bran being mentioned about telling his tale. Of course, the context here is Bran talking about Jaime and Cersei being caught in the tower. But that has context for Bran as well, because we were talking about that. Bran climbing high, metaphorically speaking, only to be tossed down by the Kingslayer. Only to rise again and become king in the end, which is pretty ironic, especially considering back in 1993, when George was still outlining the series. His original plan for the series was for Jaime to murder his way to the throne. That was the original plan. So that irony would have been even deeper. Think about that. If the original plan was for Jaime, the Kingslayer, to murder his way to the throne, well, think about the irony of him almost murdering Bran, only for Bran to become king. That's pretty cool. It's still pretty ironic, but the original 1993 outline, it was even more ironic.
And you should bring up the idea of it's a Jaime quote about him killing the king when Jon has to kill the queen.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah, good point. Okay, so let's see. Y'all's thoughts on this. Jon and Tyrion, kind of a familiar place there, huh? The Black Cells.
Tyrion has been in the Black Cells now, kind of awaiting death more than once. But it's not just the Black Cells, actually. I mean, if you think about Tyrion's arc, he spends a lot of time kind of whether it's the Black Cells a couple of times or just locked up somewhere.
Yeah. In the Vale or Slaver's Bay, or yeah.
Exactly. In prison in the Vale. Even after the Blackwater, he's kind of like locked up in his own room. They move him out of the Tower of the Hand, and he's like, when he's a slave, when he's kind of in Illyrio's house, he's kind of just, being held there waiting. He spends a lot of time just locked in a little room waiting for something bad to happen.
Yeah. So we don't know who called the Great Council. We have some notes on this, but I think we're going to skip past it mostly because we're running a little short on time. But it's going to be interesting to see who does it in the books. Could be Tyrion, could be Grey Worm. It could be a council of, they agree that this is what's necessary. There isn't a really powerful hand figure like Bloodraven to do it. That's what is missing that wouldn't necessarily fit here, unless I'm not thinking of somebody. I can't. No one comes to mind anyway, but we'll see. So let's talk about King Bran. Let's spend the rest of the episode on that because it's obviously a huge topic. And we've gathered some evidence for foreshadowing that exists in the books. And of course, there needs to be a lot more digging. Ashaya noticed that Bran the Broken is a name he gives to himself in his own mind, not unlike calling the Three-Eyed Crow the Three-Eyed Crow. It's just a name they had to give him because he didn't have a name. So he thinks of himself that way, and it's painful, of course, to think of himself that way. So it was a little awkward for them to just declare Bran the Broken. Like, wait, can we have a more friendly nickname? A little Bran the All-Seeing or Bran the Wise or something like that? Yeah. Why is it Bran the Broken? But, of course, this does remind us of Aegon III, the Broken King. And Lady Gwyn, what do you think about that parallel?
Well, just, the first visceral parallel is, Aegon III lived through a vicious war involving dragons during the course. Actually, it wasn't during the course of this war in terms of Bran, but, his mother was brutally murdered. So, it's something that led to him being quite solemn and broken. So, yeah.
Definitely. And he was forced to split apart from his brother, like Rickon where Rickon / Viserys, Aegon III did. Okay, this could argue maybe for Bran to skin change a dragon. Maybe not. I mean, we already have, there's other arguments for that. Then we have the secret siege of Aegon III trapped in the Red Keep or in Maegor's Holdfast versus Bran in the cave surrounded by whites while he's down there dreaming on his weirwood throne. Their pets, Summer versus Stormcloud. We have Sandok the Shadow versus Cold Hands, who defends them, helps them get into the cave there. And of course, the Sandok the Shadow episode definitely has some White Walker vibes with all these guys in white being led by a White Walker, a Kingsguard. We have a Weirwood Throne versus the Iron Throne. Now, of course, we did a lot of comparing Aegon III to Jon, and now obviously those parallels aren't gone. They're still there, but it looks like the better parallel might be Bran. But there's also parallels to Aegon the Unlikely, as we talked about. He's been mentioned quite a lot in this episode. Aemon's younger brother, who was chosen by the Great Council. And of course, we've mentioned that Bloodraven's Great Council puts Aeg on the Iron Throne, and Bloodraven puts Bran on the Weirwood Throne. So that is pretty incredible. And then Ashaya put a note here that Jon is, since we were talking him as a parallel to Maester Aemon, well, that's kind of like being Aeg's brother, which would be, again, Aemon. So that's as well. And in the beginning, again, this first chapter, I was really poring over Bran's first chapter, which is the first chapter minus the prologue. And there's another line that really jumped out to me about Jon and him setting himself aside to make things work. And in the very scene where Bran is crying about the direwolves are going to die, well, Jon is the one who steps forward and points out the sigil and the gods parallel, that there's 3 male direwolves and 2. And Bran thinks to himself, he never loved Jon more than in that moment. The count had come right only because Jon had omitted himself. And that just sounds to me like Jon removing himself from the line of succession, Jon taking, doing the brave thing for other people. It's a very small version of that. What do you guys think about the general idea of Westeros, the lords of Westeros accepting him in the books? Is this a far-fetched thing, or is it something that we could see develop, and maybe George could make it make sense over time? If it were to happen in the first chapter of the next book, that would be kind of like the show rushing it. But but if, given lots of time, maybe. Joe, what do you think?
There's certainly a lot of ground to cover before I think that I'd become anywhere near possible. There's kind of 2 avenues you can go down. Either he comes down and really shows off all his powers, and that somehow convinces them. But on the flip side, that could just freak them out and make them want him to be king less. Or it goes down that he goes back down to the Winterfell and kind of unites the North again. Maybe that's the culmination of the North storyline, is that Bran eventually comes out of the wilderness and leads there. And then everything that might be happening with Daenerys and destroying King's Landing and all the dragons, maybe he's the solution to that, and they welcome a Northerner instead of having all these Southerners messing up all the time. Yeah,
and you mentioned that Tyrion's speech is sort of you call it an inversion of Varys' riddle. That's neat.
Yeah, I thought that straight away. The riddle about where does power come from, and Tyrion asks the council what binds us together, and he suggests armies, which would be the man of the sword in Varys' riddle. Gold would be the merchant. He says sigils or flags, which should obviously be the lord. And no, he says it's stories of Bran, which would lend at least a little credence to what the Night King was trying to destroy. But yeah, I just thought that was Tyrion taking that riddle that's bothered him so long in the books and really coming up with an answer about that. Knowledge is power type thing.
All right, that's a good take. Yeah, for sure. Well, let me list off a few things from this first chapter that I've been excited to talk about, and then we'll get some thoughts from Lady Gwyn. She can respond to this. So in the first chapter, which is not only the first chapter, it's the first scene George imagined, which is Garrett's execution and the discovery of the direwolves. So Bran's first chapter is all about fear at the beginning, which is an interesting thing to consider given Dany's fear versus love dichotomy that comes up a lot, and with other characters in the past like Tywin and Ned. Of course, it's like I said, it's a theme in general throughout the books, but it's right there in that first chapter, and I never really noticed it. Robb says Garrett died well. And Jon says he was already dead from fear. You could see it in his eyes. Bran had already fixated on Garrett's eyes before hearing that, and he saw it too. And then Ned caps it all off with what may be the first of many uber-quotable A Song of Ice and Fire lines, where Bran asks, can a man still be brave if he's afraid? And Ned says that is the only time a man can be brave. And there's even little bits like when Bran is looking, Jon rides up next to him and says, don't be afraid. Don't turn your eyes away. Father will know. So he's, making sure Bran is brave just to facing the execution. But the second half of the chapter, well, it begins with this theme of fear, ends with love, because they find the direwolf pups. And it's a theme of mercy, because Hullen even says it will be a mercy to kill them. And that's, boy, that's an ethical conundrum, isn't it? A mercy to kill something is kind of like, you really got to be sure about that, don't you? And Bran is just horrified by this. And Ned is, it will be bad. We can't, you don't want to bring these direwolves around. But they talk him into it, partly because of Jon and his words about them being a sign from the gods. And it just struck me that this is such a seminal, important part of the whole series, and I never really noticed it was so big part of this first chapter, this fear versus love dichotomy. I have more, but I'll let Lady Gwyn, I want to get your take on this first part and see what it says to you.
Yeah, I think this is, it's huge. It's really the primary political conflict. If you set aside the magic and the whatever, the prophecies and everything, this is the primary political conflict in the series is, the ideas of fear versus love. And like you said, we see it so much with Tywin versus Ned and the things that they taught their children. We talked a lot in our Tywin episode about their styles of fatherhood. So you see it playing out in their children, which is why, we had that discussion about Tyrion earlier, but, they're all sort of living the lessons that they learned as children from their fathers. So where Dany fits in, I guess, is that her father fell very much along those same lines as a former ally of Tywin. And I guess it's no surprise to see it playing out in her arc as well.
Yeah, very true. Okay, so here's a few other things. We have that nice little series of chapters where Bran is Prince of Winterfell, and he's actually ruling in Robb's stead. It's very interesting in this new light, especially considering this fear-love theme, because Bran, when he's ruling Winterfell, he specifically thinks about how he wants to show love for his people and how they'd love him back. And Lady Gwyn, you caught a little parallel to another Stark there, didn't you?
Yes, Sansa thinks at the Blackwater, she's observing Cersei, it's this very much this theme. She's observing Cersei creating fear in people, and she thinks if I'm ever a queen, I'll make them love me.
Right
Which
on.
is why many of us are not that surprised to see Sansa being a queen.
Yeah, definitely.
As an aside.
Another thing that Sansa reminds us of that's different in the books is that show Sansa looks pretty much like book Sansa. So Sophie is a very good match for book Sansa, but Isaac does not look like book Bran, and that's important almost never, except right here it is a little important, because the fact that he looks like a Tully is important. Joe talked about maybe who he is going to freak people out. Well, it would help a little bit if he looks like a Southerner instead of a Northerner. He looks like a Tully, and the fact that he has mixed North-South heritage, that could be a plus in a great council setting, the fact that he comes from both cultures. Mm-hmm. And then a lot of people have asked about Bloodraven maybe manipulating Bran, and I've talked about the conflict between them. Well, here's an interesting little quote that y'all might want to consider. I wrote here that his mentor Bloodraven is a master of whispers in hand, who many claim was effectively the power on the throne for Aerys and for part of Maekar's reign. He was hand for all of Maekar's reign, but Maekar was a stronger ruler than Aerys. The quote continues here is that my point continues here that a raven on the shoulder of different kings is kind of how people see him. He's like the proverbial devil on one shoulder, the angel on the other. So he's seen as a raven, and that's more ominous because like I said, Bran's thoughts on how to lead are very different from Bloodraven's, and Bloodraven's quite ruthless. So here's a quote that kind of speaks to that. Lightning flashed and thunder rumbled, and dead men with black hands and bright blue eyes shuffled round a cleft in the hillside, but could not enter. That's, of course, a reference to the secret siege I was talking about before. The quote continues, under the hill, the broken boy sat upon a weirwood throne, listening to whispers in the dark as ravens walked up and down his arms. Whoa, yeah, that's a big one. So, a couple other points here. Well, as far as Bran quotes, there's a couple other ones that we don't really have time for, but I'm excited to share these with you guys later. Lady Gwyn, let me get more of your takes here on some of these other things, with the Bloodraven stuff and also the Bran's look. Anything else you want to say?
Yeah, I think those are good points, and I think Bloodraven is arguably could be viewed in the light of a kingmaker. He played such an important role in Daeron II and Aerys I's reign, and in bringing Aegon the Unlikely to the throne. So I think, in terms of the relationship he's having with Bran, if he's having dreams, green seeing, if he knows what the destiny is, arguably he's still kind of playing that role there. I think that quote, especially where it's placed, the one that you just read about the secret siege, brings us to a very good point, which has kind of been what I've been thinking a lot about. Bran's book arc, hasn't progressed a lot yet. So we have a lot of this kind of low-key, low-level stuff, right?
Yeah.
But there isn't a lot of the more overt stuff like we see with Sansa and a lot of the other characters, and the sort of foreshadowing of the way Dany's arc is going to go, because he's still stuck in that tree. And if you think about it, a few years ago, before the show actually showed us him coming out of the tree, there were a lot of fans that thought Bran was never going to leave the tree.
Yeah.
So, but it's not, saying all those people were wrong. It's indicative of the fact that his arc hasn't really picked up steam yet. He's got a lot of ground to cover. The fact that he hasn't really made a lot of progress yet is why we haven't covered him on our podcast. Yeah. I mean, he's one of the more central characters in a way, but we are expecting that in the Winds of Winter, he's going to be so central that we've kind of been waiting. And, well, we didn't think we'd be waiting this long, like everyone else. But anyways, that has been my perspective with thinking about why, the Bran thing kind of took a lot of people by surprise. And it's just because we simply didn't see it coming in the books, and the show, as we've been discussing, has rushed so many things that they didn't set it up, the way they might have done.
Yeah. Well, let's take the last bit of questions and then call it a night. We're not going to have much time unfortunately, for Brienne and the White Book. We don't have much time for Bronn and Gendry and the Small Council. These are small topics that we'll cover later. We've covered Arya as Alyssa Farman in a specific live stream already, and there's a little bit more evidence for that, but it was really nice to see that sort of semi-confirmed. I'm guessing the show didn't just make that up on their own. They probably got that from George, so that's more to say on that later, perhaps, but definitely just check out our Sun Chaser episode if you haven't seen that. That's where the bulk of it's going to be. As for Queen Sansa, yeah, it's interesting. This is kind of the inverse of Bran in some ways, and how if he becomes king, it's like he embraces his northernness only to kind of become a southerner if he becomes king of everybody. Whereas Sansa goes to the south and becomes a southerner and learns how to be a politician to come back to fully embrace the north, which hasn't happened in the books yet, but it seems like she's on that track. Would you agree, Lady Gwyn?
Yeah.
And Joe, what do you think?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think just looking at that council quickly, you can see how much influence she's got on so many different people. She's really come into her final form as a player rather than a pawn.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And Sansa's learning all that politicking, that Southern style politicking is pretty valuable, because the North isn't quite like that. They're a little bit, they don't have courts and things like that up there. It's a little different ball game. The Game of Thrones plays out differently up there. Okay, so questions from William Coupland. There's a lot of rebuilding to be done in the north, clearly. Who would be there left to take over castles overrun by Night King on the way to Winterfell? Well, let's not consider exactly which castles are gone in the show, because in the books it'll probably be a little more fleshed out. Yeah, that's going to be a massive job ahead for Sansa, Queen of the North, if that's how it ends. Depopulating, or the fact that the North will be so heavily depopulated, probably worse than what happened in the show. Probably the entire North gets overwhelmed. The foreshadowing seems to show that others being defeated at the Trident, or at least Dany fighting them at the Trident. And I kind of doubt that if they get all the way to the Trident, that there's people just doing well still in the North. They're probably quite doomed at that point. So I feel like it's going to be a lot more empty, which might be part of why they need to be independent, because they really need to take care of themselves. Might be part of the impetus. So... yeah, I think that's going to be a huge deal. I personally think like White Harbor is going to be wiped out, which is just, jeez, like it's a whole city. So King's Landing might get wiped out also, and it's going to be bloody and bad, folks. Winds of Winter is going to be nasty. Chris Trombley says, thoughts on a book fallout of the Slavers Bay. Should Dany be killed in Westeros? Will her followers in Essos leave the cities and the Slavers returns? Well, that's a bit of aftermath I hadn't considered. Yeah, I guess maybe if the Liberator Dragon Queen is killed, they won't be worried about her coming back. And yeah, that could be major political upheaval, which could just make Jon's decision, if it's him doing it, even harder. Although maybe he may not think about it, and then just be afterwards, he's like, oh, great. So I killed her, and all these cities are back to slavery. Yikes! Yeah, that's a dark but accurate thought to have here. Any thoughts on that, y'all?
Yeah, it is. It's disturbing. I mean, you see it in kind of Brit Small and Astapor. So, she left Astapor, and they didn't take long to go back to their old ways. So, yeah. I think once she leaves all that, it's probably not going to stay the way she wants it.
Yeah,
I have quite a funny image in my head of them hearing that Daenerys has died and throwing a party and enslaving everyone again, and then Drogon just goes over the sky, and they think, "Oh God, no!
Oops, nope.
We shouldn't have done that."
We won't. We promise. We're being good.
Yeah. We're definitely not high-fiving.
We were mourning. I swear, we were mourning. Yeah, speaking of Drogon, we have a minute for that. The idea that he flew, obviously, not the grabbing of Daenerys part, but the maybe flying back to Valyria or flying back to the Dothraki Sea where he was born. What do you guys have any thoughts on that? Do you think that's probably where he went?
Yeah, I mean, the Dothraki Sea would kind of be more in keeping with, because that's where he came from, and that's where the whole thing with Valyrian going back to Valyria. Yeah. So, but I mean, he could also fly to Valyria. We're left to.
Were y'all surprised that he survived?
Oh, he was.
Yeah, I just kept thinking Arya was gonna.
Me too.
Even when he was, he was kind of winding up to where you weren't sure he was going to burn Jon, and Jon wasn't sure he wasn't going to burn him, and I thought, okay, now Arya's going to show up.
That's what I said. I said, here comes the bow shot to the eye, but nope. So a commenter mentioned that I was wrong. I said that it's Chekhov's bow. She never uses it, but she did actually use it. She shot a white that was chasing Sandor in the battle, and I was like, oh yeah, she did do that.
Yeah.
But was that really what it was all for? I guess so. Oh well. It's cool that Drogon survived, and it makes me question, same thing. Does he survive in the books? Does he fly off at the end? Well, we get that, like you said, it parallels the Araya episode in Fire and Blood, and Jaehaerys, they spend some time like, well, we got to figure out what happened to Balerion. Where'd he go? So it's kind of a little aftermathy thing for Bran to be thinking about. Bran's a little more equipped to figure that out than Jaehaerys probably.
I'll find him, he said.
I'll find him, yes. www.drogon.location.
Just put on Find My Dragon.
Yeah. Beep, beep. A homing signal shows him over Valyria, moving quickly. From Janelle Peoples. Any plans on a video/discussion tying George R. Martin saying all the foreshadowing for the endgame is in the first book to what we got in season 8? Yeah, sort of. Maybe not specifically that, but given that we're rereading and re-looking at all the foreshadowing, there's no doubt that we're going to pull a lot of that. We've already, just in this episode here, this live stream, where we've really only had about 72 hours to prepare for it, we pulled a lot, and you know there's going to be more. This is just what we were. I was just looking, Search of Ice and Fire, looking at brand chapters, just looking for words like crown, throne, rule, lead, just things like that. And but there's so much more. You can find details that way, but you can't find themes that way necessarily. Well, sometimes you can, but anyway, certainly more research is very much in play now. From Pablo Avestegui, I'm sure I said that wrong. I apologize. What's going to happen in religion, or to religion in Westeros? I mean, the king is also the chairman of the old gods. Yeah, well, I think that's a great question, and we've talked about how in the books it seems likely that Daenerys will have a lot of R'hllor worshippers with her when she comes over, considering they see her as the savior, literal savior of the world. So I think they're going to be following her. And we've also got the Faith being, re-empowered, and at this point in the books, the Faith are still a thing. The High Sparrow is very powerful at this moment. So religious conflict's going to be a big thing in the books that isn't present in the show, I think. What do y'all think? Joe, you go first.
Yeah, well, in show, the Seven should be in total disarray from what Cersei did to the Sept anyway, so they would already be on weak footing. So if we get anything, I don't think we're going to get exactly that in the books, but if we get something similar, then yeah, they're already going to be quite vulnerable. And then R'hllor comes in, and then if Bran comes down and the old gods come back, or with Jon, yeah, it's going to be a big old melting pot.
Lady Gwyn?
I just think this is one of the things that's problematic about, Bran being the chairman of the old gods.
Yeah.
I like that. But that's what would be most problematic for him more than anything with the Southern Lords, because the Faith has had such a huge role in determining who gets to sit on the Iron Throne.
They really hated the Targaryens at first too.
Yeah, they did, but so even Aegon really the Conqueror had to kind of, handle them with kid gloves, and obviously they had a huge role in the first several generations of Targaryen rule.
Yeah.
So I don't know how that gets resolved. There's it comes down to there's a lot of ground to cover.
Yeah.
Before we can see a first man old gods worshiper / representative sitting on the throne in the South.
Yeah, I think Joe may have touched on what might be the solution, which is if there's a big religious conflict and it results in some sort of religious war, you may see the Faith of the Seven really decline in power and not have a lot of say in this Great Council setting. That's one possible way for it to go. Other than that, though, it is a conundrum for sure. The Southerners would, the idea of anyone who follows the Faith of the Seven supporting a king who is empowered by the old gods definitely seems like a stretch. But George is clever. We shall see.
Yes.
From Mad Doc 163. Actually, before I read that question, you talked about Aegon and treating the Faith with kid gloves, and then of course Maegor and Visenya treating them with the iron glove, so to speak. And I wonder how I wonder which version Daenerys will go with. If it's anything like what we saw on the show, she will be more like Maegor towards the Faith. It may be part of it. And like if we're thinking about how Daenerys' descent should be spread out rather than just happening in like one episode, the kind of harshness she showed to the Tarleys might be something that we see slowly play out. More lords kind of not, executed instead of shown mercy to. Maybe the same with followers of the Faith. She does things like that to them. Yeah, I mean, you got to think that some of that Maegor, the cruel stuff, fighting the Faith, that's coming back. That might be a parallel to what we're about to see in some form or another. And if it's not Cersei going after them, which it could be, Daenerys, very, very well could be her. Modberry 1 says, Bran falls under the law of exceptionalism. Well, he's not a Targaryen, but there is at least a precedent for exceptional beings written into law, taking account for that. So, yeah, it's not a direct comparison, but it is at least some kind of precedent for being above humanity, giving you an edge. Might have to reread that law of exceptionalism to see if the wording is tricky at all. Maybe George threw a hint in there. Okay, so yeah, Mad Doc 1632's question is: do you think the White Walker plot has a lot more to it in the books? Dear God, I hope so. Kind of off topic. Sorry, I don't catch you live very often. Keep up the great work. I don't think that's off topic. I think yes. I think there'll be a lot more to the White Walker plot. I think a lot more. Do y'all agree? I see some nodding. I'm like, they're like, yeah, oh yeah,
Oh,
they're
yes.
like, definitely.
Yes, it will take more than one night.
Yeah, that was not a long night, y'all. That was a short night.
That was really a short night. I mean, it probably felt long to them, but it was really like
Yeah.
not.
Not a single person froze to death. I mean, come on. We want people to freeze to death.
No mothers smothered their babies rather than see them starve. And,
yeah, where's the mother smothering babies? We demand.
No kings died in their halls. I don't know.
We're so inconsistent. Anyways. We're like, Dany shouldn't kill the children, but here we are calling for starving, freezing children to happen. Like, yes, give us that.
Hypothetical children.
Yeah. Yeah, they're hypothetical children. From Jill Wright. Jon took a knee to Bran. Is Jon no longer of the North? And then Jessica Brandwine wants us to consider Jon, his the way he looks back at the gate closing and takes note that there are no other Night's Watch in that group. It almost seems like he was going off to be with the Wildlings rather than to be with the Night's Watch. I see Lady Gwyn nodding emphatically.
Hell yes. Hell yes. This is, the thing I was talking about before. There's a huge parallel to Jon. Jon that extends throughout his arc with Bael the Bard, King Beyond the Wall. And of course, we have to throw in the lovely wildling Val, who never really seemed to have a huge purpose. I mean, she did and she didn't, but it was hard to resolve it with what we thought Jon's arc was. And now maybe.
Yeah, maybe this is his end game.
Maybe that's the reason for Val's existence.
Yeah,
to be there at the end of all things for Jon. So
how nice, everyone, to have a nice, an attractive young woman waiting for you at the end of everything.
Maybe that's the sweet in the bitter. I don't know. Just trying to be positive.
Yeah, but it is kind of funny, Jill, considering Jill's question that he knelt to Bran. It's funny that if he goes off to be a wildling, he just knelt to the king. Like, you're not supposed to kneel if you're going to go off to be a free folk.
Kneeler, right? Yes.
But but Jon was, he had to make his obeisance. He had to show that he's, not going to steal his brother's throne, his nephew's throne, whatever. Cousin. Yeah. It's his cousin. Yeah, cousin.
Yeah. No, in all seriousness, that scene, that him leaving King's Landing was very much of this sort of like king choosing exile. I got a huge vibe of that. And so, then he was, kneeling to Bran as if it's kind of like passing the, I'm leaving. It's all yours.
I'm out, bro. I mean, cousin.
Tapping out.
Cuz.
Right.
Joe, anything to add to that?
I think you're dead on. He's definitely off of the Wildlings now. He's free of all these heavy restraints he's had to carry for years. That look back at the gate was very definite goodbye to Westeros and all the terrible things that happened to him at Winterfell and King's Landing and what he's just had to do to Daenerys. That's all gone. He's put the ultimate barrier between it, and now he gets to go off and be wild, like he said to Tormund he wanted to do. And he's with Ghost.
Yeah. Which, of course, petting Ghost was like, thank you, God.
Yeah.
I know.
And he's got his proper hair back.
Goodness. Yeah. Right, exactly. And did y'all see the little green
grass, the dream of spring.
Dream of spring.
Nice touch give him credit for that. Good. Nice touch for sure.
Do have to give him credit for that.
That was good. And there's a really funny Twitter account called "Why Did Jon Snow Smile?" And it's just it shows a shot of Jon Snow smiling, and then it describes why he smiled. And of course, there's not a lot of these because Jon Snow does not smile very often.
Very rare. Yeah.
But I wonder what that Twitter account thinks of Jon smiling at the closing gate. I think that's his last smile, and it's a meaningful one. And I wonder what their take is. So if you're out there, whoever runs the Why Did Jon Snow Smile account, just know that we want to know what your take is on this too. From B-Word, what happens to Bran's powers when he dies? Does he pass them along to the next chosen king or the next, three-eyed raven character type? Well, that's a real tough one because what's going to happen to the Werewood network? If the White Walkers are wiped out, or the threat of the others is defeated, does that impact the Werewood network at all? The children probably aren't going to die out in the show like the books. So, that's tough, but it's a question that needs to be answered that they may not. Even the book may not answer it, though.
Yeah. I mean, it's implied that Bran is, just one of a a long chain of this, Green Seer kind of network. He's taking over. So yeah, and the way, we talked about this a couple weeks ago, the way they kind of end is just almost like they're just absorbed into the network, into the trees. So yeah, I don't know
Maybe
what happens to all that.
Is he just sit there just constantly on the lookout for an heir, just like scanning everyone, like that guy over there, that guy over there, that girl over there?
It's kind of like Tibetan Buddhism, where you have the Dalai Lama, and then when the old Dalai Lama dies, they find the new one, who's a baby who was born. My understanding, after, so they just kind of, it's like a never-ending chain of life because they believe in reincarnation. I don't know, maybe Bran's just out looking for his whoever it's gonna be.
He needs that thing that what in the X-Men that Professor X has, where he gets in the mind thing and he can find all the other mutants out there. That's what Bran needs. He needs to find the other Green Seers out there.
Find my Green Seers.
Yeah, findmyair.com. The Fearless Mermaid says, "Thank you all." Well, thank you, Fearless Mermaid.
Bran, maybe?
What's that?
Cerebran.
They called it Cerebran. Yes. Yes, we all need some Bran washing. Yeah. Oh. That's good. Cerebran. Yeah, Cerebro is the name of that device. I couldn't think of that. That's perfect. Also from Maura Lee, just a show of love and support. Well, thank you very much, Maura Lee. We appreciate it. And that is also a good way to end this episode, with a show of love and support. Well, we love all of you. The show is over, but as you know, given the hurried pace of this episode where we tried to fit in a bunch of endgame thoughts packed into while reconsidering everything we know about the entire damn series. So clearly we have more to say on this. We'll be having both Joe and Lady Gwyn back for live streams in the future. As you know, we'll have live streams, as I said, Tuesday and Saturday, once a month each. And we'll certainly be bringing them back, along with other excellent guests from around the fandom to give their takes, because we're not the only ones who have our heads spinning right now. Everybody's heads are spinning. A lot of anyone who's diving deep on this is it's like going down the rabbit hole all over again. So I've said it before. I'll really, really say it again. It's seriously Valar reread time, y'all. Seriously. So let's all have fun with that together. Mm-hmm. And I will be letting you all know how exactly we're going to be doing that. It takes a little consideration. Don't want to just drop a plan without giving it some thought and making sure it's going to work out. We don't want to have to change it midway. So give that proper consideration. So look forward to that, y'all. Can't wait to get back into that. And the prequel show when that comes around. There's so much more for us to do. Okay, so let's say adios for now. Let's let
People want to know when they'll see you next.
When they'll see us next. Yeah. The next live stream, we'll probably won't go live again this month. It's the 22nd. We'll probably take a little time off, and then we'll get right back to it the first Tuesday or Saturday. Either the first Tuesday or Saturday of June will be.
Tuesday. We have guests in town Saturday.
Okay, so most likely the first Tuesday of June, we will announce it as soon as possible, and announce the topic as well. We have got to figure out what we're going to do as far as that. Where to start? So many things to start with. So again, Joe, tell everybody where to find you, and we'll also a reminder to everybody that Joe's work will also be in our scripted episodes. Blackwood episode is probably one of the first ones we'll do. So. Yeah, you can find me on Twitter, Sir Buckley. You can find all you need to know there about the podcast, Our Faces and the Castles book that's coming up. I just wanted to say that I've had a real blast covering season 8. I've done a lot of work, not really slept, but coming on here, dream come view, talking to you and Ashaya and Lady Gwyn, really top notch. Couldn't ask for anything more. Thank you for having me. Well, you're welcome. Thanks for coming. You were great. You added a lot of thoughts that we would have missed, and just your sense of humor and everything as well is very welcome. Got to have a British guy on here, you know. Yeah, it's the law. It's the law. It's the law. And Lady Gwyn, so remind everybody where to find y'all, and maybe drop a few hints about what's coming up postseason for y'all, other than our continued Dance of the Dragons collaboration, which we also have to rethink some parts of. Right, exactly. So yes, indeed, we have that. We'll be
putting some thought into that. Find us at radiowesteros.com. Find us on iTunes or on YouTube. Skip on over to our YouTube channel and give us a like or a sub over there. We're on Spotify. We also have a Patreon. We've got some exciting new stuff in the works for when Yokoi is rejoining us soon. He's been on a brief hiatus, but he'll be back hopefully before too very long now, and we'll be announcing some new things. In the meantime, we have a new episode coming out within a matter of days, possibly as soon as tomorrow for our patron rolling release, and then later, sort of mid or late next week, for a public release.
What is it?
All about Lyanna Stark. It's called The Wolfmaid. It's got some really great contributions from some talented members of the fandom. We also are going to be featuring a new essay all about Sandor Clegane, contributed to us by our old friend Milady of York from the Pontiplayer project at Westeros.org. So
Very cool.
that'll be featured on our website, or on my website actually, and linked on to Radio Westeros website very soon. So if you're interested in more book content, get on over there, because there's still so much to be much to be dug up in these books, and with new books coming, gosh, we've got our work cut out.
Well, when George puts 10 meanings into every sentence, it just, geez.
That makes it makes our job much more fun.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say hard. It just makes it complicated and fun.
Yeah, it's the good kind of hard. You have to think a lot about it. It's not easy, but the difficulty is fun. It's a fun challenge.
Right.
And just for reference, and if anyone's curious, if anyone's wondering, if you've ever sent a super chat, we do share our super chat revenue with our guests. But also, I highly recommend subscribing to Radio Westeros' Patreon so you can get their episodes early and their bonuses, because Lady Gwyn contributed a lot here. And if you haven't checked them out by now, well, there's no better time than now, because, well, they have a lot to say. Their catalog is deep and rich.
Yes, it is.
So, right on.
We have a lot there.
Y'all do. It's true.
Yep.
Okay, so again, thank you to everybody who has attended all of our Book to Show live streams over the years. There'll be more of them to come under different auspices, but same basic energy, same enthusiasm and level of research and attitude and all that. So the future is bright, folks. Thanks to Ashaya for monitoring everything, the chat and all of the technology and everything, wearing so many hats at once. Thank you to Michael Klarfeld for the video intro and outro. Thank you to Jesse Kowal/Joey Townsend for the music, both versions that are used on the podcast, as well as all of our sponsors and patrons. Time to read the Patreon credits. I believe I had to skip them last week, so it's definitely time to get that back in here. The Mysterious BR is Hand to the King. The Smiling Wolf, Lord Stephen Stark of the Broken Tower, is Titles, Hand of Queen Ashaya, who is known as the best. He wanted us to say it that way from now on. I like it. It's very much very meta, very appropriate. Lord Jim the Fortuitous of Wars and Politics of Ice and Fire blog is Warden of the West. Lord George Stormsville the Cunning, Lord of the Chiliad, is Warden of the East. Quebeth the Unfrozen is Lord of the Bricks and Castle Crimson Light, Defender of the Old Gods, and Warden of the North. Lady Kelly McMath of Covington is Lady of the Villa Hills and Crescent Springs, Warden of the South. Lord James Tuttle is King of the Stepstones and Narrow Sea, Commander of the Royal Fleet, consisting of the Narrow Fleet led by Flagship Caraxes and the Bloodstone Fleet led by Flagship Prince Daemon. His fleets were untouched by Daenerys' wrecking of the Iron Fleet. He knew to stay away from dragons. Some people are smarter than no magic Euron. High magic Euron might be a totally different ballgame. We'll see. King Beyond the Wall Sidney Jesse is the Fallborn, Lord of Blue Spring and the Haunted Forest, wields a dagger of dragonglass and the Valyrian steel blade Red Frost. Our small council includes Lord Daniel the Sneaky Russian, Master of Ships, Grand Maester Via James. Lord Benjen of House Hornwood is Master of Laws. Lord Fabian Flowers, the Bastard of Greenshield, is Master of Coin, not Master of Groin. Lord Johann of House Orcos is called Shadowhawk, Master of Whisperers. Lady Direliz of Castle Naki is the Alpha Patron. Lord Dan of the Red Mountains and Castle Great Bell is Breaker of the Second Stone. Gregor the Toasty is Lord of the Breadfort. Lord Ryan of Castle Stonegate is Guardian of the Rocky Mountain Pass. Ashlyn Winter is the Hawk's-Eye, Lady of Castle Skyfall. Lady Mikkel of Moonacre is leader of the Werewood Protectorate Alliance. The Lord of the Halls of Castle Hillcrest is wielder of the Valyrian steel machete Everglazed. Lord Alster Whitaker is Lord of the Dawnhold. Lord Bemmy Snugglebunny is Guardian Ranger of the hidden 100-acre Werewood, dual wielder of the Valyrian short swords Glorious Morning and Little Light Wise, sharpshooter of the Werewood and Ironwood laminated longbow Todd Von Oben. When you fear things cannot get worse, Snugglebunny enters the fray. The Bastard of the Wolfswood is First Forester of the Old Gods, sworn to House Iron Werewood. Listen for the silence. Lady Lyanna Kelly of Wolf Island is Protectress of the Steelhold. Casey Stark of House Acres. Lady Kay of House Archer is Lady of Earthdog Hall, Huntress of the Wolfswood, and Guardian of Maddie Squirrel's Bane, the Mighty Direweenie. Lady Raywin of House Dillsdane is the Star Spear. Peter Rivers, the Pale Dragon and heir to Bloodraven. Sir Matthew of the House Begonius. Our King's Justice is Sir Troy the Steady, wielder of the Valyrian steel blade Fate. Our Queen's High Council includes Bloody Ben Blackwood, Master of Whispers, Rebea Stares, Lady of Waves and Mistress of Ships, Captain of the Iron Shadowcat. In the shadows we bear our claws. Katrin the Wise of House Trondheim is Master of Coin. Grand Maester Elizabeth, middle daughter of Lyanna Mormont, is First Lady to forge both the silver and Valyrian steel links. Laura Boros is the Lady of Infinity, Master of Laws. Our Kingsguard is led by Lord Commander Miriam R. Sir Dolores D. is longest tenured White Sword. Willa Crowsbane, Guardian of White Tree, is First Lady of the Free Folk. Sir Dean the White is Knight of the Black Star. Sir Jord of House Pepsi is the Beverage Knight. Gregor Snow called Snowbear is a Bastard of Winterfell. Sir Glennon of House Leanne is called Lioncloak. Our Queen's Guard is led by Lord Captain Commander Haema Helminth, the Sellsword Sentinel. Alexander of House Atreides from the seat of Dune. I must not fear. Fear is the Mind Killer. Becca the Bard is Songbird of the North. Michonne the Melodious, the Star of Old Town. Minds over Masters. Sir Rambo, Knight of House Gannon. First Blood. Sir Leon of House Walker, wielder of the twin Valyrian steel blades Fire and Ice and the Werewood bow Rain. Amber the Adamant is the Knight of the Mists and Mother of Squids. Our Beard Guard includes Lord Commander George the Golden, Sir Joshua Oakhart, the White Oak, Lady Rita of the Coppermane, the Unbound, Dance the Fervor. Sir Jeff Warden of the AC is wielder of Triad, the multifaceted beard of Platinum, Red, and Brown. Stay frosty. Sir Tim Corgyle is Mad Boy of the Western Desert, and Queen Helena von Landstein is partying like it's 1999, since 1980-something. A kingdom for a drink. And last but certainly not least, rounding out the shout-outs, is our History of Westeros Night's Watch, aka the Night's Howatch. Lord Commander Benjen Umber is the Silent Giant, wielder of the Valyrian steel greatsword Winter's Kiss. First Builder Maegor Snow, aka Maegor the Cool, is the Fire in the Snow. First Steward Sir Jurion of the Torrentine is called Pale Wind. And First Ranger Sir Source Delica is of House Gramercy. Also want to give a shout out to our book, The Thrones Effect, which Ashaya and I contributed to Chapter 2. If you want to do some more reading about the extended world of Game of Thrones, how it's impacted society, how it's impacted people, very meta stuff, really. Naming of kids and pets and all that sort of fun stuff. We go into a lot of excellent detail, if I do say so myself, and so do our other co-authors. So check that out. There's a link available on our website, and I believe there's a link in the episode description as well. And that's it, everybody. So thank you again to everyone for making our show coverage so excellent and wonderful and fun, most of all, and hopefully thought-provoking. And, of course, if you do think so, well, stick with us. We got a lot more to come. And I say this more emphatically than I've ever said it. Valar Rereadus.